Hello again, friends! And you are our friends, and welcome back to another edition of Jim Cornette's Drive Thru right here, wherever it is that you are on this Monday, early evening, afternoon, all different time zones, all over the country and all over the world. Of course, next week we are on Tuesday, because we'll be reviewing the Royal Rumble, but we're right back here for another ordinary Drive Thru. I am your host, the great Brian Last, and of course the man who will be answering your questions and going off on a tangent or two, the star of the drive-thru, the star of so many drive-thrus, Mr. Jim Cornette.
Good Lord! That was the most rambling, meandering, going around your elbow to get to your wrist introduction. And then in the introduction of the program, Brian, is supposed to increase anticipation of the entertainment and the hilarity and jocularity and excitement of the program. And instead you diminished it for apparently no reason whatsoever otherwise than you were stuck for other English words to come out of your face, prefaced and previewed next week's program where we talk about the Royal Rumble, the big show, the big event, the one that everybody's waiting for. And then, but now we got an ordinary show for you. Way to decrease enthusiasm. Should we even do this now? Maybe we ought to just wait till next week for the big show. What do you think?
What you're not getting is that I was right there competing.
Oh, I'm not getting it.
I was trying to win most meandering intro for the Corny Awards, and that was my submission right there.
Well, I think the category is closed. No more nominations, ladies and gentlemen. The Corny Award for 2021 for most blithering, meandering, roundabout introduction of a program to diminish expectations of same goes to Hawaiian Brian, the podcasting lion.
Thank you. I'm gonna put the golden racket right over here on my mantle.
This is supposed to be your show. I'm tired of carrying the ball around here. As Pork Chop Cash said one time to Gorgeous George Jr. when they had ended their tag team partnership and Pork Chop had become a babyface. He said, "You've been riding on the wagon, and you've been dragging your feet. And I don't mind if you ride on the wagon, but don't be dragging your feet." Brian, you're dragging your feet.
That sounded like Ernie Ladd.
Well, Pork Chop Cash sounded a little bit like Ernie Ladd sometimes.
Boy, Gorgeous George Jr., there's a weird gimmick. I mean, because he had a lot of success. He was a manager. He was a wrestler. He was seemingly very Southern. And, of course, Gorgeous George was not Southern. Gorgeous George. How old was Gorgeous George when he hatched young Gorgeous George Jr.? Have we ever talked about this?
Well, let's think about this. Because, first of all, Gorgeous George Jr. was a guy who worked in a variety of places and had a lot of top spots from the late 60s through the late 70s. And he was a manager toward the latter part of that primarily, but he was one of those guys, a wrestler manager. You know, he could go either way. No puns are intended there. But with the Gorgeous George Jr. gimmick, he worked on it. They brought him in and gave him a big push in Memphis and when and the whole territory when Jarrett and Nick were still together, but Jarrett had the Memphis end. He came in and got a big push as a babyface for Southern title matches with Lawler, and then switched heel. And he worked a variety of places, but since he had to be, he would have been born in easily 1940, right? 40-ish, early 40s.
You would think.
So when Gorgeous George Sr. died in 1963, he was not that old of a man. Was he 49?
He was maybe 49. I mean, he looked much older than he
because
of
the alcoholism and bad things. But so let's so 63, 40, 50, 90, 40. It could have been. You never know. It wasn't, but it could have been. The age would have fit. But the point is, old Gigi. When he did the Gorgeous George Jr. gimmick as a babyface, he did the whole thing. He had the valet, he had the flowery robes, he had the Zabada, but when he was a heel as a manager, he had like the colorful jumpsuits and the jaunty cap and carried a riding crop he could whip guys with and everything, but he was still Gorgeous George Jr.
Where was he from?
Gosh, off the top of my head, I do not know legitimately, but he was a very southern fella.
Although George Wagner did wrestle in various southern states during his career, both before and after he was Gorgeous George.
I think that's what GG Jr. was counting on, that people knew that.
Now, it
could have happened.
Didn't Robbie Eagle wrestle as Gorgeous George III for a time?
Yes, he did. As a matter of fact, I believe he did. That may have been right before then Savage bought the rights to the Gorgeous George gimmick legitimately, I guess, because George's wife was still around, right?
His last wife, yeah.
His final wife, yeah. And so Savage bought the rights to the Gorgeous George character for that girl that he was seeing at the time, and that went nowhere. But for a while, there was actually a female wrestler named Gorgeous George.
Well, the big rumor, too, was after he bought the gimmick, Lanny had nothing to do, and Randy, when he went to WCW, got Lanny a deal there, too, but Lanny wasn't being used, that he dyed his hair blonde, and he was actually going to be the new Gorgeous George, but instead, Randy gave it to the stripper he met and made her Gorgeous George, which made no sense.
How did we get started on Gorgeous George Jr.?
Well, it's just a meandering kind of show.
Well, we went through Pork Chop Cash to get there, but also, and then they did the deal because Lawler and Gorgeous George were heel partners for a while, and then, as a matter of fact, they did 2 turns in the same weekend because Lawler and George were the Southern Tag Team champions in Memphis, but it was George and Pork Chop that were the Southern Tag Team champions in Louisville. It just wound up that way for whatever reason. In those days, they did those kind of things.
Who do you like better as the manager of the Mongolian Stomper? Gorgeous George Jr., Don Carson, or Bearcat Wright?
Ron Wright.
Oh, or Ron Wright.
Ron Wright. I like Ron. Bearcat Wright was bigger than the fucking Stomper and didn't stay with him that long. Gorgeous George Jr. had a good run, but it was an odd looking pairing. But
a lot of success in Southeastern with that combo.
True, but Stomper was going to be a success regardless. He had so much heat. You could put fucking Howie the mailroom guy with him. But I just like Ron's because his interviews were always more fun. But anyway, where I was going with that story before you interrupted me, when Lawler and George split up, George came out. He was the baby face now. He came out and he cut the promo about how I can't believe that Jerry Lawler said that my father died drunk and penniless in a back alley with a whiskey bottle in his back pocket. Jerry Lawler, my father wasn't a drunk and my mother wasn't a hoochie coochie dancer. But anyway, have you seen, you know what I did last night?
No.
Because it was Saturday night, and I'm off, semi-off this month. I'm not in a panic this month. We're still doing the shows. I'm working on projects. I've just hired my new team. My new team is doing incredibly. Mr. Featherbottom is doing a great job so far. I've told you about Hotchkiss. But anyway, I'm partially off this month because the Cornette's Collectibles store is down at jimcornette.com, so I can get some relief. And trying to cross things off my to-do list. But for the first time, and I would say, I don't remember in the year 2020 that I sat down and watched an entire 2-hour movie on television in one fell swoop. I really don't, because generally, I'm always doing something. So I've either got the news, South Park, or the MeTV Untouchables marathon on in the background. So I can listen to, I've seen all that stuff before. You can listen to the news. But if you want to actually sit down and pay attention to something that you haven't seen before, when you're watching this first time, I haven't had 2 hours. I go to sleep by that time of night when I've, got that time. So last night, I've been wanting to see it. I got it on the television, watched it. The new movie, it's not new anymore, but it's recent, the remake of The Invisible Man. Have you seen that movie?
I have not.
Don't.
Oh boy.
Go out of your fucking way not to see. And also, somebody said, here's a conspiracy theory for you. all the conspiracy theorists out there, the TV, I can't say TV guide, that's not the publication, the TV guide, but the on-screen television guide that told me it was on in the first place, gave it 4 fucking stars. I think Meltzer is now giving out the stars for the movies too. It's come full circle. We stole that idea from the movies, and now it's come back, and the guy that stole the idea is giving out because this was about a -1. If it'd been in a Tokyo Dome, it would have only got 1 star. You've seen the original Invisible Man.
I've seen the original. I even liked, surprisingly, the movie with Chevy Chase, Memoirs of an Invisible Man.
Well, that would work too, but that's not the Invisible Man. That's another Invisible Man who wrote his memoirs. But this is the Invisible Man. It's not like a count in Romania who's a vampire, but it's not Dracula. It's Dracula, it's Frankenstein, it's the Wolfman, it's the Invisible Man, the Mummy. This Invisible Man had nothing whatsoever. Not only that, he wasn't even really invisible. His fucking suit was invisible. He was only invisible when he was wearing the suit. The Invisible Man was indeed invisible. Right? He had to wrap himself up like a fucking mummy so that people wouldn't see that they couldn't see him. That's the whole point of the thing. But besides that, Frankenstein has undergone a number of rewrites, but it's still, the concept is a fucking guy built out of dead parts that's reanimated. Dracula. They had to call him Count Alucard when they didn't have the copyrights, or, any other type of Czechoslovakian or Romanian or Bolivian or whatever count will work. But it's still a Dracula. He's a vampire. He sleeps during the day, stays up at night, he sucks the blood. Sort of like a fucking dirt sheet writer. But what they've completely done here is they've fucked the whole thing up. This bore no resemblance to the Invisible Man or the Invisible Man backstory. And as I've mentioned before, the man wasn't even invisible. He wore a suit that made him invisible. And it meandered around. It was the tension was high throughout this entire movie because you kept waiting for something to happen. And it so seldom did that you were in tension almost the entire time. Fuck the Invisible Man. I'm sorry. I don't want, you can make it another title. Come up with a different story. The Invisible Suit. Or the guy wearing the invisible suit. Or the whatever the fuck you want. But don't say it's the Invisible Man if it has nothing to do with the person that everyone knows as the Invisible Man or the story behind same. Don't just rip off titles and then go completely different ways with them.
Who starred in it?
I don't know who these people even were. I didn't see much of the Invisible Man for obvious reasons. He was on at the first, and then he was mostly wearing the suit, but I'd never seen that guy before. The lead actress, I couldn't pick her out of a lineup. To this day, I don't know who the fuck she is. Bunch of fucking nobodies. 4 stars on the TV guide. I scoff. I fart in their general direction. And if anybody wants to debate me about this, go fuck yourself.
What's upsetting is you could have been watching King of Kong or Monster Squad. Instead, you watch this. But I will say, on the topic of TV guide, I just got some old TV guides that had wrestling features in them. I got one here from November 1953. Jimmy Durante.
Oh, you bastard! Where did you find this?
I know how to find stuff.
All right.
Jimmy Durante on the cover. It also says here, one of the articles, are wrestlers human beings? So that's the big question in this issue. And if you go, if you turn to page 5, there's a picture of Buddy Rogers, and it says Camden's Herman Road. He's now called Nature Boy. So right in the article, they expose his real name.
Well, see, I don't know what the point is, but you can see it. TV guide, yeah. Well, fuck the Invisible Man.
Do you have a TV guide collection?
Of course I do. I have the majority of the TV guides from let's say, the 1967 through Well, I kept them through the mid 1980s, and then I inherited my mom's that would carry you through about the early to mid 90s, and then she stopped subscribing, and that's where it stops. But yeah, for about that 30-year period, I've got most of them.
There's one I wish I still had. When I was a teenager in 93, the New York TV Guide for Long Island for Sports Channel had Smoky Mountain Wrestling Fire on the Mountain listed on the schedule.
What?
I have no idea why or how.
Wait, what?
Yeah, it was listed in the TV Guide. I remember seeing it like, oh my God. And then I tuned in. It was like, Herb Abrams or something that was on. But we had that where you never knew what you were going to get because we had Herb Abrams.
But that Smoky Mountain Wrestling Fire on the Mountain wasn't even a television show.
I know.
That was our big show in Johnson City. We did a we did a VHS back in those days, but it
makes no sense.
I don't recall making any deals to broadcast it in New York.
It makes no sense whatsoever that it was there. But, it was weird when, we had the IWCCW show, the Savaldi show, and typically it was the worst wrestling show ever.
Yeah.
And they would replay every single week Vic Steamboat defeating Tony Atlas for the ICW championship, and the battle between Rick Rude and Honky Tonk Man on the microphone with Bill Apter over who was the greatest intercontinental champion of all time. Not even a match, but two guys arguing about who was a better champion in another promotion. And then you get Curly Moe and a bunch of crap. But every now and then, I don't know what happened, they would air something that was extraordinary. They aired Florida wrestling from like 85 at one point. When I was 12.
Well, Kevin Sullivan,
who, I think booked for Savaldi. Yeah. But when I was 12, they aired back-to-back weeks off the master tape clearly, UWF from 1986. And that was like a mind fuck. As a 12-year-old, I had never seen that before. There's Jim Ross and Michael Hayes hosting it. There's Jim Duggan and DiBiase and Dr. Death and Sting. It was incredible. And then week 3, it was back to ICW.
Yeah.
You never knew what was going to air here.
Because, he never knew which tapes he was going to come across, and he could slip to the station. But anyway, that all ties together in what I'm about to say next. If you hate the Invisible Man, and you want your money back for having paid to see it if you did, or if you were bait and switched by an unscrupulous pro wrestling promoter who teased you and tickled your taint with top talent and then gave you dreck, or if you're one of those promoters whose tapes were pirated and stolen away and spirited away and aired on television, and I still want to talk to Sports Channel fucking Brooklyn or whoever it was that was going to try to air my Fire on the Mountain. But if any of these things have happened to you, you know who to call.
Call Stephen P. News. If you need to sue. An outlaw mud show or two. He'll sue the rest.
That's right, folks. If you want to tighten that shit up around here and keep these things from happening, then you need to call the man with the plan, the man that can extricate you from the depths of legal despair and propel you to the pinnacle of legal freedom in terms of compensation for your damages, no matter who's fucked you around. This is the man you want to champion you. This is the man you want on your side. Of course, the illustrious, the incomparable, the legendary Stephen P. New at newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084. Boy, I tell you what, Stephen P. New's new law office, it looks better than Mar-a-Lago. He has been so successful championing or even championing the rights of the little guys, the folks of Minden, West Virginia, the people that have been given cancer by Roundup or talcum powder or various poisonous chemicals, the people that have been the victims of nursing home abuse, the families and loved ones that have been harmed and damaged by all the greed and avarice that's out there in the United States today. Only one man is out there consistently swinging for the fences for your rights. If you need to sue, call Stephen P. New. Get even with Stephen. I call him when I don't need to sue anybody because he's a hell of an entertaining fella to talk to on the phone, too. Stephen P. New. What do you got to say about that, Brian?
I go the other way. He's such a great guy to talk to and so entertaining, I end up suing everybody.
Well, you just enjoy that. It's one of your hobbies. You collect TV guides and sue people.
For the record, I don't collect TV guides. I only...
Just TV guides with wrestling. You're not fucking George Costanza's father, Frank Costanza.
That's right. TV guides from the era of the Dumont Network that cover wrestling, I collect.
Oh, anyway, I ought to sue somebody. Before we get started, this is your show, right?
Hypothetically, yes.
Well, hypothetically, but hypodermically, it's going to be my show here for a second because I'm going to give an inoculation against bullshit. I has been accused of something, Brian Last, and I'm not even going to have to hire the services of Stephen P. New to vindicate myself from this because you know what? Here's the thing about people that are habitual, pathological liars, especially ones without a good grasp of the English language as well. If you're going to be a good liar, you got to be able to at least talk good. But the bad thing about habitual, pathological liars is after a while, they can't really remember exactly what the details were of what they made up. Either that or they told the original story and people found some things wrong with it, so they started modifying it over time until they can't remember the details. Or the shit just sounds implausible to begin with, but as we know, there are some people who will believe stupid fucking liars no matter what. However, the moral to this story, Brian, never lie about an obsessive record keeper. That's a good thing that everybody should remember. Never lie about an obsessive record keeper because your bullshit can't stand up to the scrutiny of dates, places, and facts. Do you know now what I've been accused of by it? I'm going to start out at the beginning. A lot of people still to this day, and I guess there are new listeners, but sometimes they ask, who's he talking about when he says shit stain? For the purposes of this program here today, shit stain is Vince Russo. Now that I've said that, we'll refer to him for his more normal nom de plumes of either shit stain or dipshit. But guess what he has accused me of, Brian?
What he's accused you of now? Well, no
apparently here, because I've heard from 3 or 4 different people, and that's about his entire audience, so I guess everybody heard it to ask about it. I don't really know where it was and what context. I'm not going to plug any of his various programs or the written interviews he does where he comes off with his verbial effluvia. So you don't need to read it because the basic gist of it, I'm about to tell you, it was my idea to have Bob Holly and Bart Gunn become the new Midnight Express in the WWF. It was also my idea remember, if you do, you may be one of the only ones. The NWA Invasion that went on for about 5 months in the first part of 1998.
A lot of people remember that, sure.
Well, only because of the horribleness and awfulness of it that will never be forgotten. Because there was not one legitimate, serious highlight. Dan Severn being on WWF television may have been a fucking highlight just for the talk about somebody completely out of place. You know, a guy walking through a men's locker room whistling Stranger in Paradise in reverse. Dan at the time was the only real thing about the whole fucking program. But these were my ideas. That is according to some statement that Shitstain has made apparently recently, because I've heard about it from several different people. We've talked about this in the past, but as we've mentioned so many times, there's so many new listeners. If you have to ask who Shitstain is, you're a new listener. But the new let me start out with the NWA Invasion, because that came first. Brian, you keep track of these things. Is the deep dive that we did about Survivor Series 97, the Montreal screw job, the fallout from same, and the week by week, day by day, December of 97, that whole deep dive that we did, that's on YouTube, right?
That is on YouTube, the Montreal Omnibus Collection. Anyone can go find it, the official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. And I guess in terms of timeline here, we should also say we just did something about the promos that you were cutting on Raw, which kind of leads into this period of time.
Yeah, but the reason I mentioned that first timeline is because we went over explicit detail there, including when I was lucky enough to be relieved of my duties on the creative team. And when the NWA Invasion began happening, I wasn't quite sure. I had to go back and look at the books, look at the records, because I was like, well, I thought everybody would realize that this is bullshit, but apparently with the passage of 22 years, people conflate time periods and put things together in their heads wrong. And it said, yeah, I was in some of this, and I had to go back and check. So we established in that deep dive on the Montreal aftermath and etc., how I left the creative team. But I'll go back and just recap the dates. It was the holiday season of 1997. And as they did at that point in time, we were going to do a lot of off-day television taping to make up for a break they were taking during Christmas, right? Because there were no WWF events of any kind from December 15th till December 26th, 1997. So at that time, the creative team consisted of me and Shitstain and Vince McMahon. And my God, I know that Dreadlock Ed, old Ed Ferrara, had showed up a time or two, but I don't think he was there yet, because I never really had to sit much with both of them together. He may have just slid in, but nevertheless. And the situation was that we were doing In Your House pay-per-view in Springfield, Massachusetts on December 7th. Then we would do a Raw taping in Portland, Maine on December the 8th. Then we would do a Shotgun and Raw taping in Durham, New Hampshire on December 9th. Then there was a TV off day where there was a house show in Bangor, Maine on December 10th, which was a Wednesday, and then back to Lowell, Massachusetts at Memorial Auditorium on December 11th for another taping of Raw that would air over the holidays, December 22nd. So anyway, I had called Beth Zaza, Vince's secretary, because normally we met at Vince's house on Wednesday, and the clarification in my mind that I wanted before I made my plans was, are we supposed to go from Springfield, Massachusetts to Portland, Maine to Durham, New Hampshire, then drive back to home, go to his house in Greenwich on Wednesday the 10th, and then go back to Lowell, Massachusetts to be there before noon for this Raw taping? I figured Vince would probably want to do it, but nobody else did, right? I said, let me clarify this, Beth. And she said, they're putting the schedule together or whatever. I said, well, and I knew old Shitstain had kids. And I said, well, and I used his proper name, if Vince wants to go home on the 10th and then stay and doesn't have to come back for Raw on the 11th, I will cover for him. He can cover for me on the 10th. I'll cover for him on the 11th or whatever. Let me know what's worked out. And she said she would, and got back to me and said, no, you don't need to be there. And it may have been in my follow-up call of the next week. When are we meeting this week? And she said, or did I ask on that call? I said, well, when's the next meeting? And she said, they'll let you know. And that was the way I was relieved from the creative team. And boy, was I relieved, because she never let me know about another meeting I was supposed to be at. And I never asked. And that because that December 10th day is the day that old Shitstain has recounted that he was finally able to get Vince alone without me being in the room and cut my nuts off and bury me. Oh, we can't get anything done, Vince, because he's always pointing out what's wrong with everything I say. Because I was always pointing out what was wrong with every fucking thing he said. But anyway, so that means that after December 10th, I was no longer a part 1997, of the creative team. Correct? Let's remember that date. Because after that, I never sat in on another creative meeting in the WWF. Ever. I was at production meetings at television. A lot of other people were too, but by then the damage had already been done. I was never at another creative meeting involving just Vince and the Inner Circle, which by that point and right afterward would be Shitstain and Ed Ferrara. And if anybody doesn't believe that, Brian, you remember the famous story of the three guys that escaped from Alcatraz, that they never captured them. They never found the bodies. Those guys were never seen again in public, but the story went around, especially in the prison, that they had made it, that they had got away with it because it gave people hope. Do you think when they closed Alcatraz as a prison and made it a tourist attraction, that if those three guys did actually make it out of fucking Alcatraz, that they would have come back to take the tour of the place later on?
Certainly not.
Well, I never went to another goddamn creative meeting at Vince's house after I was relieved from that position. And as I believe I've also mentioned, the fucking idiot uses that as an excuse to explain why I constantly, and at that time and all the times after that, have taken the piss out of everything he's ever done. Well, he lost his job. I didn't lose my job. I lost 3 hours in my car every day fighting Connecticut traffic, not every day, every Wednesday, to go to Vince McMahon's house to sit in the presence of Shitstain and listen to him fucking natter on. I was making the same amount of money, and I was employed by the company in Connecticut for another 1.5 years, making the same amount of money. I just didn't have to go through that shit. But anyway, so what happened after December 10th, 1997? How did I suddenly worm the NWA Invasion onto the television screens of the WWF? I remember that I was home in my house I actually lived in Huntington, Connecticut. It was a suburban area up there. I was at my house in Connecticut, and the phone rings, and I know it was a Sunday because the reason why I was not on the road headed toward a Raw taping on Monday was because the Raw that Monday was in Long Island at Nassau Coliseum. It was an hour drive away. I also know by looking up the books that the only WWF event on that Sunday was in Hamilton, Ontario. It was an afternoon show. It was a house show, and Vince wasn't going to be there. None of the writing team would have been there. I wasn't there. I was announcing at that point also, but I didn't need to be there, blah, blah, blah. So I get a call on Sunday, and this sounds like one of those things that Vince McMahon finally pulls the trigger on and he's been mulling over, or that somebody has pitched him, and he does it at the last minute. And basically the call was, Jim, you know all the guys in the NWA. Yeah. I don't mean, let me try this again. Not all the guys in the NWA, but the NWA board of directors. Howard Brody was the president at the time. Dennis Corluzzo was the guy who was really the mover and shaker behind most of the shows that were being run at the point, the NWA tournaments and everything. But he asked if Jeff Jarrett, who was returning or had just returned or was about to return, could be in some way affiliated with the NWA, and the NWA give their blessing with this. And this came out of completely nowhere. Well, on Vince's part, Howard Brody had been beating up the office with faxes and phone calls for about a year trying to do something, but nobody get back to him. But all of a sudden, but it made sense because everybody knew that Vince Russo, for whatever reason, at that time was friends with, that's no longer the case. Jeff saw through him after a while, but was friends with and liked Jeff Jarrett. And why he liked the epitome of a Southern wrestler, and I mean that in a good way, in a positive way, I have no idea, but everybody knows that he and Jeff were close, and Russo's one that for several years, the only time Jeff got used was if Vince was in charge. Anyway, I said, yes, I know these guys, and can they come to television? Can Jeff be the NWA World Champion? I said, no, they've already got a goddamn NWA World Champion, and they can't switch it in the next 36 hours. But I'm sure they'd like to work with you. And I knew, and I'm trying to think, you might know, was it Dennis or was it Howard that got that brand new nice looking NWA, what was it, the North American title?
North American, yeah.
The belt. They had a nice new belt. One of them had got that belt, and I said, they got a North American title, and it's a pretty belt, and I bet you, he could be that. Well, find out. So that's the direction I got on this. This is Sunday. I'm at home in Connecticut. And our TV taping the following day, as I said, was in Nassau Coliseum in Long Island. And then the following day was Raw for the next week. December 30th, we were taping in New Haven, Connecticut, taping Raw for January 5th. And that's where they wanted it. So I call Howard Brody because he's the one's going to have to make this decision. And I went to Howard's biography. And because I knew that that was a very short notice thing. And Howard wrote a biography. His original manuscript was 1,000 pages. He wrote down every fast food order he'd ever made. And there's a couple of factual errors here in this couple of paragraphs, which I will point out. Well, they're just the ones I'm going to read, but it's the way that Howard saw it in his mind. Because this is the way he started out. About a month later, because he'd talk about continuing to reach out to the WWF to no avail. But about a month later, during a Sunday night booking committee meeting, that's because I called him on a Sunday night. And I said, Howard, I've just heard about this. So he thought we were in a meeting. I'm sitting at fucking home, suddenly like when they called me and said, hey, can you get a bump and hoe for Tuesday in Phoenix, right? But after a Sunday night booking committee meeting, we'd never had one of those. Vince, unless it was a production meeting at pay-per-view. McMahon, Cornette, Vince Russo, and the rest of the writing staff. I also didn't call Howard and preface him, hey, Howard, I'm not on the writing team anymore, but we got an idea. They were trying to come up with a storyline for Jeff Jarrett, who was returning to the WWF. Someone suggested he hold some type of championship and tout himself as being representative of some imaginary organization. I actually didn't remember that part of it. I thought we got specifically to the fucking NWA because it's why I was calling him. But anyway, he says, while McMahon liked the concept, he didn't like the idea of a fictional group. So Howard probably nosing around. This may be some of the backstory. He then turned to Cornette, or he phoned Cornette and asked, what about the NWA? Cornette knew all too well we'd jump at the chance to get the NWA brand on WWF television, especially after trying for nearly a year. So basically, that's how it happened. That Sunday night, Cornette called me in Tampa to ask if Dennis and I could be in New Haven on Tuesday, explaining that they wanted to give the NWA North American title to Jarrett. I later learned they initially wanted Jarrett to have the world title, but Cornette knew we wouldn't go for that. But without hesitation, I said yes, and Cornette said he'd call Dennis to fill him in. A half hour later, Dennis called me. So that was fucking Sunday night to do this on a Raw taping on Tuesday. That's how they started fucking thinking. No advanced planning whatsoever, but again, that's the first I heard of it when it was a fucking deal where, okay, ask these guys if we can do this. So in New Haven on December 30th, I have Howard Brody there. I have Dennis Corluzzo there. We got the title belt there. Jeff is back. And the big debut of this is I basically go to the ring with Dennis and Howard and announce that these are the representatives from the NWA, and the next match will determine the new NWA North American champion. And then Jeff Jarrett wrestles Barry Windham, and after I whack Barry with the tennis racket, Jeff pins him in 3 minutes and 35 seconds. So this NWA Invasion starts with me bringing out two guys that, and in all due respect to Howard and Dennis, two guys that nobody on national television had ever seen before or had connected in any way with the NWA that hadn't been a major force on television in 8 years. And I announced that the next match will determine the North American title. And then Barry Windham, who 10 years to the day previously had probably been the best worker in the business, who had injuries at that point, had gained weight, had not been presented in a major spot in either promotion in several years, and honestly saw, because he was smart to the business, saw the spot he was being put in and was less than motivated. And Jeff Jarrett coming back trying to make the best of it in 3 minutes. And then, Brian, do you remember what happened after that match was over with?
No, actually.
As soon as that match was over with, they ran Steve Austin out, or Steve Austin out. Neither way, they ran Steve Austin out, and he fucking hit a stunner on Jarrett, who just won this prestigious title, and then got up and mocked his fucking strut. So that obviously was my idea. That's the way that I would debut newcomers and a new promotion and an invasion. This wasn't an invasion. The NWA Invasion was like the invasion of the United States by the Isle of Malta, right? So then,
wait a minute. Let me stop you, because you've been going on for a little bit.
I know I have.
Just to clarify, Vince Russo is now saying that this was all your idea?
This is the quote that I was sent that was reproduced on a news site. As I said, I'm not going to give any of his broadcasts or any of his interviews but the reasoning behind this whole thing that I'm going through and about to go through for you, more of this, is that Vince McMahon was supposedly fed up with me sitting there telling all these stories about the old days and the real wrestling and the NWA and the Midnight Express. And he decided to just say, fuck it, we're just going to go ahead and book this and show Cornette that this shit won't draw these days. Because, of course, that's the way Vince McMahon thinks. Say what you will about him, and we have, especially lately, a lot. But I don't think anybody's ever said that he, as a personal rib, was going to give over a bunch of his television time to shit that he didn't even think was going to work and wasn't entertained by personally, just to prove a point. And also, see, here's another thing. You know, these fucking pathological liars, they justify in their heads what they're saying to themselves so often in going over their stories to get it straight, and or they're sympathetic to themselves anyway, so that ends up being the way they remember it. But I've mentioned before stories about being on the creative team when it was myself and Bruce Pritchard and Vince, and JR was there for a lot of it, and that was the four of us that would ride in the car to the TV tapings for the majority of 1996, pay-per-views and TVs when we were officially traveling. We would tell a lot of stories. If you're in the car, or more importantly, Bruce and JR and I would tell a lot of stories when we were waiting for Vince McMahon, which happened a lot. And that carried over. But then when it became me and Bruce and Shitstain, you were always waiting for Vince on the phone in his study with one of his problem children or whatever the fuck. He was on Vince time. So you sat there and you bullshit and you told stories because you can't do anything constructive until the fucking conductor gets back. Now, in hindsight, I can see me and Bruce Pritchard telling old wrestling stories, me telling one of mine or him telling one of his from Houston or Brother Love. He had a few of those. Shitstain wouldn't really get it or understand it because he wouldn't understand the terminology. He didn't know any of the people involved. So he probably wouldn't have been entertained. But I never, in creative meetings where we were trying to work, just sat there and told stories for the specific nature of telling stories. What I did was I pitched shit, because that's what we were supposed to do. When you book, you throw ideas out. What if so-and-so did this? What if so-and-so wrestled this guy? What if this was the fucking finish? What if this was the angle to make these two guys mad? So you draw on personal experience, things you've done or things you've seen. So if in pitching stuff like that I was somehow going, oh, and then also you should bring these same guys back and book them now. Well, in some cases I may have, if they were still working. But no. But see, here's the problem there. Shitstain had never pitched angles or finishes because he'd never done any. And he didn't know what those words meant. It was like, I can see where he may have been frustrated because watching me, watching JR, even watching Bruce, it's kind of like watching a pilot fly a plane. Oh, you can tell that the end result of whatever he's doing is working, but you have no idea how the fuck he's doing it. Because he didn't know what the fuck any of this was. and he didn't know who the fuck or what the fuck any of us were talking about. He was watching Jerry Springer. He had seen as a fan wrestling angles, but he was watching Jerry Springer. But anyway, that's his reasoning, is that Vince McMahon, not Shitstain, but Vince McMahon decided to show me after I was already off the creative team because couldn't work together with Shitstain, that all these guys, that this wouldn't work and etc., just to prove a point. And so they, of course, since this was my idea, I'm sure you're going to be able to see my fingerprints all over this, because after the initial grand debut of the NWA North American Champion, I went back and looked at the record book and saw, and by the way, this is The History of Professional Wrestling by Graham Cawthon. It's the Volume 2, WWF 1990 through 1999. Handy reference point. I bet old Shitstain don't have one of these. He'd remember when he did his supposed shit. So, anyway, any other questions before we move on to the next segment of the invasion? Because it gets better.
Well, I was going to say, are we going to talk about the Rock and Roll Express and the other parts of the invasion?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Because I took it at the time as, okay, this is an idea that they want to help give Jeff Jarrett something. Now he's got a belt and he's kind of an outsider. It's helping Jeff, and it's giving the NWA attention, so I'll be involved and I'll be more than happy to contribute or cooperate, right? And by the way, the NWA during this 5-month period of time, I think this went on, increased their member promoters from like 7 or 8 to something like 30 or 32. So it was a positive for them, which is the only reason I stuck with it as long as I did. And also, as I mentioned, Jeff, I thought they were legitimately going to try to do something with him this time around. Because, especially being even shit-stained like Jeff, right? So, but anyway, after that initial tremendous debut on television, let's see, the next Raw was I remember this, in State College, Pennsylvania. This was January the 12th, because now they've done the NWA taping thing, and they call me back. It may not have even called me, may have talked to me that night and said, well, what other NWA guys? Well, at the time, the Rock and Roll Express were the NWA Tag Team Champions again. It's the Rock and Roll Express. Well, can you get them? Well, of course. Yes, I can get them, but the point is, what are you trying to do with them? So they asked me, and so I make the connection with Ricky and Robert. And on January 12th in State College, they bring them in and put them on Raw. Now, by the way, the Rock and Roll Express are, at this point, still to that time, the most popular babyface tag team attraction that Vince's only major competition over the previous 15 years has ever had. Because the Rock and Roll, when they were there, they were more over. The business was hotter than it had been to that point in time until 1997. They started heating up again. Now it becomes the Monday Night War thing. But do they do a history package? Do they do something to indicate in any reason, any way, why that you should like these guys who were last seen on national television 7 years ago? Because they'd been in Smoky Mountain all that time and had the one match in WWF 5 years beforehand. No. They throw them out there. Listen to this match. Skull and 8 Ball. And all respect to the Harris Boys. I like the Harris Boys too, but they weren't exactly goddamn being used like fucking the Road Warriors at that time in the WWF. It was all that faction warfare bullshit, and it was on the low end of that. They were coming down, right? Skull and 8 Ball defeated NWA Tag Team Champions, the Rock and Roll Express, via disqualification in a non-title match at 2 minutes and 29 seconds. He didn't, I mean, maybe in hindsight now he was trying what he thought would get these guys over, but this looks like a complete sabotage job if being done by anyone that knows what they're doing. And the only reason you have to question it is because we know he didn't know what he was doing. Hold on. Were we at the we were in the Royal Rumble. I think Jeff was fucking with Owen in the Royal Rumble, but then, okay, Raw in Fresno, California, January 19th. We all had to go to Fresno for this. NWA North American Champion Jeff Jarrett and with Jim Cornette and the Rock and Roll Express at ringside, pinned Bradshaw with Barry Windham at 3:41, 3 minutes 41 seconds, after Windham accidentally clotheslined his own partner. After the match, Windham turned on Bradshaw. Once again, in 4 minutes, Jeff's lost. Rock and Roll Express wandered around ringside. We beat poor Bradshaw because Bradshaw and Barry Windham had been the failed new Blackjacks. So this is all just a mess playing out on television. As a matter of fact, the next day on a Raw taping, Jeff Jarrett, who I thought they were trying to push, the North American champion, beat Chains, who was Brian Lee, after the Rock and Roll Express interfered. So it took Jeff help from the Rock and Roll Express to beat a guy they were using in the middle. And Jeff was the star of this group. Let's see, where's the next Raw? Some of these are fun. Hold on here. I got to get to, I think Evansville, Indiana. Yeah, Evansville, Indiana. Jeff Jarrett and Barry Windham beat the Legion of Doom by disqualification in 5:57 when Bradshaw interfered and chased after Windham. That's when they had brought the Legion of Doom back and wanted to bury them too. Hold on here. Here's a classic. Dallas, Texas, Reunion Arena. This is on Raw is War. NWA Tag Team Champions Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson defeated the Headbangers via disqualification after one of the champions was thrown over the top rope to the floor, which was against NWA rules. Yes, we were going for using NWA rules, but every match that any of these guys had ended in a DQ or a run-in or a count-out. European champion Owen Hart beat NWA North American champion Jeff Jarrett by disqualification. The Headbangers then got involved in this. Poor Headbangers. The Headbangers the next week, actually the next day in Waco, Texas, Headbangers beat Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson for the NWA tag title after Cornette hit Thrasher with his tennis racket, but Thrasher fell on top of Ricky Morton. During the bout, Thrasher threw Robert Gibson over the top to the floor, which would have caused a disqualification under NWA rules, but Hebner didn't stop the match. All this middle card bullshit. So this is going through February. Anyway, it's all DQs and 2-minute matches. I remember one, the print is too small for me to find it right off, but it was some kind of goddamn 6-man tag where now the Rock and Roll Express have turned heel and they've joined up with me, and so is Barry Windham, but Taka Michinoku and the Headbangers are on the other team, and we're going to have a 6-man tag match where the Headbangers are going to do a promo, set Taka up to give a funny fucking comedy punchline. We're going to have a 6-man tag, and there's going to be a finish, and then we're going to turn on somebody else, and there's going to be a switch and whatever the fuck. And they sent us out there and said, the segment, you've got 4.5 minutes, including entrances. So we went out as quickly as we could. And the Headbangers set Taka up for the line, and Taka delivered the line, but because Taka's accent was so thick, absolutely nobody understood what he said. So nobody reacted. Then we had a 1.5 minute 6-man tag, did a ridiculous finish, fucking did some kind of afterbirth, and everybody's going up the ramp, and it was live too. They couldn't fix it, right? And I'm fucking beside myself, and everybody's got their head down, and I come and I see Shitstain berating the Headbangers and Taka for the delivery of the line or whatever, and they walked off, and I went over to him. It's when I knew by that point he was a complete idiot, but I didn't hate his guts. I was still trying to help him in some respect. And I sat him down, and I said, just so you know, I said, that out there was the shits. We all know it was the shits. It was poorly conceived to begin with, and we didn't have enough time to do it, and it was too busy, but it was still the shits, and it was done a shitty way, and everybody knew it. And you were talking to some guys that are happy to be here and glad they've got the spot. But if you talk to certain people, certain wrestlers like that, when they've come back from laying a complete shit in the ring on national television, and you start browbeating them like that, they're going to beat the fuck out of you. You wait till everybody goes and sits down in a locker room, and then you say, well, that was a shits, wasn't it? Well, what happened? But you don't browbeat them when you're the one that gave them shit that couldn't possibly be done, and it wasn't going to be very good to begin with, and then you're yelling at them about it afterwards. Somebody is going to beat the fuck out of you. But he never listened to that advice. Anyway, so we went through the whole Rock and Roll Express here. Oh, and then he tried to start burying the headbangers. Poor headbangers. They got involved in this somehow. In Wheeling, West Virginia, in March on Superstars, the headbangers beat the Rock and Roll Express by DQ when Barry Windham interfered and hit Mosh over the head with a chair. And due to the stipulations, the headbanger that won the fall would earn 5 minutes in the ring with Cornette, and that's when the clip is around where I elbow drop and beat poor Chaz. Because, fuck, what am I going to do? You know, he's unconscious. Yes, that's an old angle too, but you don't fucking do this in the middle of shows with no fucking context and no push for any of the fucking participants. So anyway, that happened for a while. And then the headbangers were the NWA champions, so at least they had something going for them. This was before that he put pretty much both. Well, I won't give Shitstain credit for ending both their careers, because Glenn Ruth was Thrasher. And he went, I think he was injured at one point. And while he was off, they sent him to do an appearance at a Major League Baseball game somewhere as a WWF talent, right? He took his wife. And I don't remember this whole story because it's been almost 25 years ago. But if Glenn or Chaz is out there listening and wants to call in or write in or whatever. But Glenn took his wife this ball game. She's sitting in the stands and a foul ball beamed her in the fucking head and gave her like, I don't know if it's permanent after 25 years, but at the time they were saying it was going to be permanent vision damage and all this shit. And so, and he was off anyway, and then I think they sued, which I would have also. And that got heat, and I think that was pretty much him, and he was done. But Chaz then had to become Beaver Cleavage with his big-titted mother that only lasted a few months because she wasn't even a wrestler. She's one of those twats that fucking Shitstain would hire to play parts. And it was supposed to be an incest angle because Shitstain is as absolutely as close as you can be to being a virgin and still having had the textbook definition of sexual intercourse, and had to work all of his frustrations and his pubescent fantasies out on television, and everybody had to be involved in some weird fucking thing. So that killed the headbangers. But this was beforehand when I was just beating them on television. Like any of this would be my idea. But anyway, then we get to the best part. The new Midnight Express, Brian. You were waiting on this one, weren't you?
I think everyone was.
I've told this. Yeah, thank you. Am I going on too long?
No, this is fascinating.
All righty.
It's nice to hear things debunked.
It's nice to hear conspiracy theories debunked. So I remember this one exactly where I was because I didn't answer my regular phone that day at my house in Connecticut, because I was afeared it might be somebody calling me I didn't want to talk to. But there was a bat phone number that only my mother, my significant other's family at the time, and the office had, that rang in the kitchen. And it rang. And I picked it up, and it was Vince McMahon. And I said, oh, this can't be good. That's when he pitched the idea of, well, pal, what about we remake, renew, or have a renewed Midnight Express? What? Well, yeah, you know, because I'd been managing the Rock and Roll, and I'd been involved in a thing with Wyndham and Jarrett and blah, blah, blah. And I think at that point in time, Severn was on the way. He wasn't quite there yet. Okay. Well, we're thinking about Bob Holly and Bart Gunn. Okay. Bob and Bart, both at that time, were guys, they weren't doing hardly anything with them. They were barely booking. And I liked Bob Holly, especially as a talent. a lot of Smoky Mountain Wrestling fans will remember he was on my first taping, and I did about the first 6 tapings. Bob Holly, before he became the modern Bob Holly that most people know with the buzz cut and jacked up 260 pounds or whatever, and he was a long-haired, 220-pound, classic Southern heel wrestler when he was in his early mid-20s. But he had come along right after the downfall of the territories. He used to come up with Pat Rose to Georgia or to TBS shows in Atlanta and do jobs. And I saw him there, and that's when I was starting to think about Smoky Mountain Wrestling. I said, this guy, he reminded me of Bobby Eaton when he was younger. He could do the elbow off the top. He could do the drop kick off the top. His knee drop off and I know people are saying, Bob Holly, what the fuck? He got bigger and older and heavier and changed his style. But when he's in his mid-20s, he was the closest one that to this day that I've ever seen that could do Bobby Eaton's knee drop off the top, similar to Bobby. Nobody's ever duplicated it, but he was very close. So I brought him up and started him as a heel in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, Hollywood Bob Holly. But at the time, he lived in Mobile. That was a pretty good drive to come up to Knoxville, even to get on TV and be pushed because his real job was a welder. And that's when his wife or girlfriend at the time told him he had to make a decision to either wrestle or weld. And he chose welding because that's what he was making money at. But he was also friends with Percy Pringle, Paul Bearer. And after he'd had to pull out of Smoky Mountain, it was probably about a year later that Paul had pitched him to the WWF, and they brought him in because Bob also in his spare times, he did things really good that he couldn't make any money at. Wrestling, race car driving. But one of the things he also did was he wasn't like fucking Dale Earnhardt, but on a local level, he raced cars. So that's another of those things that Vince fixated on and brought him in as the wrestling racer Thurman Sparky Plug. Remember that? And actually, they fucked that up because I think Thurman Sparky Plug was supposed to be a takeoff on STP, but they reversed the fucking initials.
I think so. I think that's right.
And I got to be honest, I had to fuck with Bob a little bit. When he first got up there, I was glad he had the job. But I was like, see, that's at the time when Smoky Mountain had a relationship with the WWF also. And some of my guys were starting to come up. I said, see, if you'd have stuck with me last year, you'd have to be up here under your real name instead of getting to be called Sparky Plug. He was fucking hot, right? Because he didn't like Sparky Plug. Nobody did. It was fucking stupid. But anyway, then they changed it to Bob Spark Plug Holly and blah, blah, blah. So I liked Bob. And Bart Gunn, the Smoking Guns, the Bodies had a nice string with them, and we'd worked with them with Yoko and Owen. They were good athletes and good young guy. Billy at the time, they were both, in their 20s. So I didn't want to piss on it, the idea of a new Midnight Express, if these guys were going to get a chance. But I knew it was doomed because it's like they didn't learn from the new Diesel and Razor. I said, well, could I manage these guys and give them another team name and I'll manage it? Well, no, we want it because the people know you with the Midnight Express. See, that's the thing. There's another part about Shitstain's revamping of history. Me and Vince McMahon and Shitstain were never, that I remember, in a car at the same time. We never traveled together because he wasn't on the team when it was me, JR, Bruce, and Vince. And as I've told stories many times before, not only did that foursome break up as far as writing to the TVs because Shitstain came into the creative team, Bruce went into work in the office, JR was more doing announcing, whatever. It was also because on the rare periods that Vince wanted to drive, nobody wanted to ride with him because it scared you to fucking death. Bruce was JR's quote to him when he quit was, Vince, I love you, but I'm not going to ride with you anymore because I want to live to see my daughters again. I never was that blatant. I just figured out ways to get around it until that, was no longer an issue. After that time that Vince drove us back from Albany to Stamford when he was mad they rerouted us due to weather and we were 100 miles an hour for 3 hours in a goddamn severe thunderstorm. But anyway, I've told the story before when we would go into convenience stores after the shows, or we'd be in the arenas, and the security guards, especially in old Crockett territories, they would see me when I was on television managing the WWF champion Yokozuna or the tag team champions Bulldog and Owen or whatever. They would point at me and still go Midnight Express, because that's what they remembered, because wrestling in 93, 94, 95, 96 was not nearly as popular as it was in 1985, 86, 87. And you would get that look on Vince's face, right? You'd see it like, but I wasn't pitching the idea of bringing the Midnight Express in, because at the point in time that I was there working in the WWF, only one of them, Bobby Eaton, was still even wrestling. And he was under contract to TBS. So anyway, Vince calls me, new Midnight Express, Bob Holly and Bart Gunn. All right, okay. And I actually said, let me call you back, because I called Bobby and I got him at home because they weren't really booking him down there either. And I told him what they wanted to do. And I said, I won't do this if you don't like it. And he said, Corn, the same thing. Well, if they want to use those guys, I don't care. Okay. So I called back and said, all right, Bobby didn't have a problem with it. We'll call them the Midnight Express. Since they've never teamed up before, when should we get them together? So I actually had to suggest that they fly them up to Stamford and go to the ring at the studio so that they could actually work out a couple of tag team moves before they put them on television as a fucking new version of the most accomplished heel tag team of the previous fucking 15 years. And that's what we did with 1 or 2 practice sessions where I just showed them a couple of the Midnight's double team things, but also they just got the feel of each other and how each other reached out for the tag and their timing on spots and shit. And it wasn't like you could manufacture the Fabulous Kangaroos in 2 workout sessions, even with 2 guys that are really good athletes and good workers in their own way. But we found that's what we did with the original Midnight Express, was we found a few moves that each one guy could do that looked good when they did them together as some sort of double team, and we went with that. And I can't believe there was more than a week, I don't think, of pre-notice on this, but if I'm looking at the records right, their big debut, here we go, March 30th in Albany, 1998, Albany, New York. They just fucking showed up as the goddamn new Midnight Express and beat the Headbangers to win the tag team titles of the NWA that weren't over, that nobody'd put any fucking thought into anyway. But they were teasing my taint a little bit. March 31st in Syracuse, that's when Dan Severn debuted. Because obviously I knew where the shit was going with the undercard shit with the Headbangers and rock and roll and the new Midnight Express. It is giving them a chance to get booked, but I had hopes that they would not fuck up Dan Severn, because Shamrock was there. You get Dan Severn in the goddamn same company as Ken Shamrock. A lot of people may not remember 20-something years later. Brian, you can probably give more details than I can, but the 2 biggest pay-per-view buys of the UFC up to that point in time had been the first 2 Severn Shamrock fights. Is that pretty much correct?
It sounds correct. I don't know for certain off the top of my head.
And I know in dates, and it's been 22 years, but they had 2 fights, Severn and Shamrock, in the UFC on pay-per-view in the mid-90s. They each won one, and they had each done with, and this was before they had television. This was before the Ultimate Fighter. There was no UFC on broadcast television. People have to remember that point in time. And they had done over 100,000 buys at that point, I think, each, or maybe more than that. I can't remember, but obvious, out of the ordinary buy rates. So when I found out they wanted to bring Dan in, I sent them 10 pages written out of things that Dan Severn shouldn't be asked to do, couldn't do, shouldn't try to do, and conversely in professional wrestling, and all the things that he should do or could do or that you could do with him. You couldn't make him one of the boys. You couldn't make him another wrestler. Dan was never a smooth professional wrestler. Dan got over and could have gotten over better in places if he had been used better as a professional wrestler by capitalizing on the things that he could do, the awards he had won, and the fact that he was real. Dan Severn, as I've mentioned before, was one of the most decorated amateur and professional athletes the United States has ever produced. He was a legitimate all-time superstar in amateur and collegiate style wrestling around the world. He was a UFC heavyweight champion, UFC super fight champion, the UFC Triple Crown winner. They inducted him later in the Hall of Fame. I figured, okay, we can get something. We can get something here. Dan can back it up. I can fucking talk. And his debut on March 31st in Syracuse on the Raw that aired for April 6th, he was matched with Flash Funk, obviously Too Cold Scorpio. We worked that match out. I did the guest commentary trying to explain to people who Dan was. He and Scorpio got in the ring. Scorpio knew what fuck was going on. And it was probably the most legitimate thing that people had seen on Raw, legitimate looking thing that people had seen on Raw, and maybe before and afterwards, except the Brawl for All didn't look this legitimate, and it was. Fucking Dan rushed him and fucking snatched him with the belly to belly, rushed him in the ropes and flung him across the ring. Did the thing where he drove him through the ropes. It was a shoot style thing. That was a prototype for the style that Dan should have. Quick, dominant wins, not every week. Talk it up, have Severn or have Shamrock get involved on a personal basis and settle their fucking rivalry before, honestly, people saw that Dan probably wasn't going to wrestle professional style. He was going to do what he did. But you could get that fucking pay-per-view out of it, right? They did nothing. So after this initial fucking debut, then they started having Dan work like, one of the boys like everybody else, and it wasn't special anymore. That he never touched Shamrock, I don't think. But anyway, that was hope I had for a little while, and they started doing the other bullshit. But then finally, with the new Heavenly Body thing, the only time that I ever
New Midnight Express
or New Midnight Express thing. The only time I ever pitched anything for the New Midnight Express, they were booked in Greenville, South Carolina on April 24th in a house show against a rock and roll on the card. And the place was sold out because WWF hadn't been to Greenville in fucking 10 years, right? Suddenly they're there. And it was the new building. It wasn't the old municipal auditorium. And the people loved the match because they loved seeing the rock and roll in person again. And they liked it was kind of a little nostalgic thing. And then the next day they were in Fayetteville, did almost 10,000 people, and the match the same way. The people like seeing the Rock and Roll Express again. So I said, we got to put this thing. I called JR because we were doing a pay-per-view in Greensboro at the Coliseum. April 26, 1998. It was Unforgiven 98. And as a matter of fact, I don't have my book here with the attendance figures and etc., but that was the first time that a wrestling show had drawn more people, and they had jacked the roof up since then on the Greensboro Coliseum. But that was the first time that a wrestling show had outdrawn Starrcade 86 in 1998. And that's when the market rep that did the advertising came into me that day, and he said, we filled it up because the capacity at that point was like 21,000 people. And in the old days, the Starrcade days, it was like 16.6. And he said, they said, this is the biggest wrestling crowd that's been here since then. It's the first time that I think they beat the gate by like 30 or 40 grand or whatever. He said, but do you know how many comp tickets Crockett's people gave away for Starrcade 86? How many free tickets? I said, I got no idea. He said 30. What? They gave away 1,500, 2,000 in the WWF on all the radio stations and sponsors. There were 30 comps out for Starrcade 86. Anyway, I called, I said, put the match on the fucking pay-per-view. Let the people in Greensboro see the Rock and Roll Express. And that's when they did. And we had the match, and they went about 8 minutes. And fucking, we beat them because they couldn't switch the fucking belts because, they didn't want to fucking switch the belts. I don't know. But anyway, that's the only time that I ever suggested that me or anybody else ever be specifically added to a show. And at that point, then, the whole fucking Midnight Express thing was just blah. And that ran and mostly on the house shows. I mean, there's a few other TV things we did. They did put the new Midnight against Degeneration X at King of the Ring in June that month, so that they could let Degeneration X beat them on the way to the, it was the WWF Tag Team Champions. Billy Gunn and Road Dogg at that time beat the NWA Tag Team Champions in less than 10 minutes. That's when I had to wait a minute and a half for China to come around and hit me in the nuts. That's, I think, the only pay-per-view match they got ever. It was ridiculous. I mean, you could say that it was just like amateur booking, like the guy at AEW now. He'd never done it before, and he thought this is the way you get people over. But anybody that knew what they were doing or knew what they were looking at said, well, these guys are all being buried specifically. They can't beat anybody but each other in 3 minutes, usually by disqualification, and nobody knows why they're there to begin with. We were fence post turtles. So then finally, the start of the, where was it? The start of the Brawl for All. Here we go. We had a house show in Atlantic City, New Jersey at the old convention center on July 11th, 1998. And even though I didn't have to, I was getting paid. I only really managed the Midnight and all these other guys on television. And sometimes house shows, if they were drivable from the Northeast, I was getting a payoff from the talent pool. So I was going to make the same thing whether I went or not. If I was booked, I went because I was a good, soldier. But I remember I went down to Atlantic City because I had the next day off, and I spent the night, and Dennis Corluzzo and his gang and I went out to eat, right? But I remember also at that show, the Headbangers beat the new Midnight Express in the opening match. And the only person at the headband, that was my gimmick, and I loved those guys too. But the only person, or the only team that the Headbangers could beat was the new Midnight Express. And it gave me flashbacks to when the original Midnight Express had to wrestle the Dynamic Dudes because that was the only team that Herd would let us beat, right? I'm like, this is fucking ridiculous. And I was grumpy anyway. And then I showed up in the Meadowlands on Monday the 13th for Raw. And that was going to be the debut of the Brawl for All. And in the production meeting, I learned that Bob Holly versus Bart Gunn would be in the opening round. And after the production meeting, I went up to Shit Stain and several people sitting at a table. I said, okay, the new Midnight Express is done? Well, no. I said, then they're fighting each other. And he did that shit where he looks at you like everybody is supposed to be able to think like an idiot. And he said, but this is a shoot. What? Well, this is a shoot and there's real money up. So they would fight in this, but then they could still be partners. I said, you blithering fucking idiot. And this is a quote now. I said, you blithering fucking idiot. I said, this is all supposed to be a shoot. And yes, there's prize money, but this $10,000 or whatever it is, if you win each fight, they're the NWA Tag Team Champions. They're trying to be the WWF Tag Team Champions. You mean that's a life-changing amount of money? 10 grand to a professional athlete that he would want to goddamn fucking break up his successful championship tag team. The point is, it's all supposed to be a shoot. You can't have these guys fight each other, especially for real, because somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, and then somebody's going to be grumpy, and then have them go out and be tag team partners. Well, I don't know what to tell you, bro. So I said, I know what to tell y'all. I left that room and I went in and found Jim Ross, and I said, JR, do you have me managing the new Midnight Express? And JR's told this story before, I think. Do you have me managing the new Midnight Express on any more cards? He said, I think a few. I said, erase that. Erase it. I have officially retired again as a manager. And that's the last time I ever managed in the WWF. In Atlantic City, in the opening match, Headbangers and the new Midnight Express. And of course, they fought that night. And the new Midnight Express was done also, and they never teamed again. But that was the last straw. I had all I could stands, and I could stands no more, even if my friends were getting jobs and or publicity and or I was trying to be a good employee. That was ridiculous. So, does any of that, Brian, that I just read off for you with dates and places and facts and things sound like anything that I would have done on purpose?
As someone who has seen a lot of Smoky Mountain and OVW, it sounds like bizarro OVW. No, it doesn't sound like anything you would have ever done.
There you go. So, folks, just remember, when you lie, every time you open your mouth, when you habitually lie to try to make your shit legitimate and or excuse the stupid things you've done, two things. Take good notes and never lie about an obsessive record keeper, because they will take the piss out of you every time, just like I just did. Fuck you, my idea. Fuck you showing somebody that it wouldn't work then. You could have brought goddamn the most famous wrestlers in the world, from Abraham Lincoln to Frank Gotch to fucking Dan Gable, and put them in those situations, and people would have farted in their general direction. And I didn't have nothing to do with it except trying to cooperate. Have you noticed a theme? Every time that I try to be good for somebody else's benefit and cooperate with something because I think it will help somebody else, I end up looking like shit and end up trying to choke somebody anyway.
People will probably laugh, but I've always thought you were too much of a nice guy in certain situations.
Yes, and that's why every time that I eventually end up trying to choke somebody, it's because I have attempted to do a good deed that has been turned against me. And which is why I have totally given up on being cooperative in any instance of anything that I don't want to fucking do. Because it always falls in a hole and I get to fucking shit for it. You know, it's enough to drive you just absolutely berserk. I need somebody to talk to. I'll tell you, I talk to you all the time. I guess you're good enough. But folks, if you don't have a Brian Last in your life, if you need somebody to talk to, you can talk to the folks at BetterHelp. BetterHelp, it's not a crisis line. It's professional counseling done securely online. They're available worldwide with a broad range of expertise and a bunch of different counselors. They're hiring new ones all the time to handle the demand. You can schedule weekly video or phone sessions, no waiting rooms, no going out in the pandemic. Or if you're out in the sticks and you don't have help available that's reachable within a legitimate distance away from you, now it's just away from your phone or your computer. And if you go to BetterHelp, and that's better, H-E-L-P, betterhelp.com, you can see the testimonials from the people that have been helped by their service. It's easy to change counselors and find the one that you like. They'll work with you, folks. So go to betterhelp.com/JCE and get 10% off the first month's services. You can join the over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. We've had so much feedback from people that listen to the podcast that have emailed us that this was a service that helped them, especially when they couldn't get out in the world and communicate with other people in case of a lockdown. We're not through this whole thing yet, so we may be locked down again. Anyway, the folks at BetterHelp. Folks, this podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp, and Jim Cornette's Drive Thru listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/JCE.
Well, Jim, obviously 1998 was a pretty traumatic year for you, and reliving it wasn't much fun.
Hey, I got an idea.
What's that?
I got an idea. If they can do the new Midnight Express, they can do the fake Razor and Diesel. What would people have thought if they did the new Rolling Stones? And you had Ron Wood there, but the rest of them were members of the Strawberry Alarm Clock.
I don't think that would go over too well.
You think that would get over?
Nope. Not really.
All right.
But
go ahead.
Something to cheer you up right here on the show. I'm not sure of this person's name because they did not put it in the email. Thus, I'm not even sure if it's a man or a woman, but I'll just read the question, or the comment here.
You might not know if they put the name in.
I'm a longtime listener and decided to get Jim a personal cameo from the one and only Gillberg. I hope you play it on the podcast because Mr. Gill sounded like he had a blast recording this and reminiscing about a time you killed some wrestlers' dreams.
Okay. And by the way, I guess there's no way to send me a Cameo because I don't have the smartphone. So this is like the next best thing.
If you recall this story, can you please elaborate about the second time you were embarrassed to be a part of the wrestling business?
Okay.
And let's play this from Gillberg.
Okay, this thing says it's for Jim Cornette. Now, I don't know if it is or not, but if it is, what's up, Jim? How you doing, brother? And let me tell you something. Oh, the old Gillberg's back, man. That's right, the Gillberg's back. How you doing, brother? Look, they asked me to say a little deal about something that I, knew. So, back in the day, it was, I guess, I was about 3-4 years in the business. And I was running a show, MCW, because Barry Hardy and I owned it back then, if you remember. And we brought you in. And one of the kids had sold 100 tickets. And he sucked. And I'm not going to say his name because he's still a worker. But man, he sucked. And I mean, you went out to the ring with him. After the match, he goes in, he's all excited and everything, and you're sitting there, and you're just like, oh my God, man. And then he goes, hell, man, thank you very much, Mr. Cornette. He goes, you got any advice for me? And you go, yeah, I do. He goes, son, there's only been twice in this business that I've ever been embarrassed to be a wrestler. And that was one of them. He said, if I had any advice for you, I would tell you to quit wrestling right now and get the fuck out of the business. I kid you not, Jim, and I know you got to remember is at the LaFontaine Blue in Maryland.
Oh, brother, my God.
If this is for you, God bless you, man. I love you, Jim. You take care, brother. The Bergman said, we'll get the hell out of here. And Jesse McVaughn said, I'm the one who gave you the video. Take it easy, Jim.
I like him more and more each time we hear him on Cameo.
He's a fun guy. And he took the Gillberg thing and ran with it. He
was just on TV. They just brought him back on Raw as Gillberg again.
And especially when Goldberg is still there, I'm thinking Goldberg has got to be going, oh, fuck, he works for the same company. I can't just go up and squeeze his britches full. But I do remember, I don't remember the specifics of the awfulness and rottenness of the match. But when he mentioned the building, I remember that locker room. I remember because Maryland Championship Wrestling's been around for quite some time. And as he mentioned, it was him and Barry Hardy then, and then Danny McDevitt got involved and Axel Rotten, not the bad idiot garbage deathmatch Rotten, but his supposed brother that he tried to leech off of. It unfortunately has passed away now. They got the wrong one. But anyway, they had tremendous success in the late 90s and then, obviously it's survived to modern day, but that was at the period of time. Also, is what we were just talking about. The period of time after I was on the creative team in the WWF for the next few years. On camera, I was doing announcing, whether it was the fill-in on Raw or, Superstars or syndication. JR and I did Superstars for about a year and a half while that was a thing. And then the international heat was always fun to do. But I was doing announcing. But one of the things I was doing in the office was not only booking some of the, I say job guys. I say that, and it's not disrespectful. That's just the term we used to use before they came up with enhancement talent so guys wouldn't feel bad. But everybody starts as a job guy, right? It's what you do from there. But I was booking the guys for TV because I knew all the promoters in different places. And I also made some of those independent shots, not only for, an extra payoff, but also to see a lot of these guys. And that's where I found some of these people that went on to be signed later on, etc. And I liked doing that because it was more like being in the wrestling business than it was working for the WWF at the time. So I got to work for them, but at the same time go and have a little fun actually seeing wrestling matches every once in a while. Obviously, the one that Dwayne was talking about there wasn't exactly fun to see. I may have been the only other one I could think of that would have been any worse if I said the second time I've embarrassed. That came after the boxing match between Dennis Coralluzzo and Tommy Fierro, because that was the pinnacle right there.
Oh, you weren't there for the Macarena contest between Tommy Fierro and the Iron Sheik.
I was not. Oof. Or elsewise that may have been number 3, but anyway, that's what, and that's what I was doing a lot of the time there was establishing, and that's how I was able to help Dennis and Howard, pad the NWA membership with member promoters that weren't just doing, complete bullshit, but were actually trying to run responsible shows because I was out and trying to pay attention to what everybody was doing. So, but yes, thank you, Gillberg. I remember that. I don't remember what his name was, the guy's name, or I'd say it, but I don't remember it.
That's what I was going to say. Do you remember who the wrestler was?
No, I have no idea. No, but you might not believe this, but that is not the first or last time that I've given somebody the advice that they should quit the wrestling business.
When was the first time? Do you remember that?
Oh, good Lord.
And what's it like for you being at ringside? I mean, here you have what would classically be called a ticket seller. Someone who sold 100 tickets and they got booked on the show. You're managing him for some reason. I don't know what that is.
Well, no, when I would do these shows, whoever was running it, I would say, how can I help you? What can you do that, that I can be of a help or whatever? A lot of times, Dennis liked to have me, like I'd manage Ace Darling and Devin Storm. Devin Storm became Crowbar. In WCW, you'd most know him by, and Ace Darling was Mike Moraldo, who became an actual successful businessman and made a lot more money than he'd ever probably made in wrestling. But I'd manage them because they were a good team. Or that's how I really first saw the Headbangers, Glenn and Chaz, on Dennis's shows. Of course, he had me, the Spiders. He had me manage Candido one time, and sometimes it would be guys that. You would, this is one of the best guys we got. We want to have Jim Cornette manage him. Or sometimes it would be like in this instance, well, this guy sold 100 tickets to our show and there's only 400 people there. Can you go out with him? And normally it would be a guy that was trying and just, but this was just, yeah. But I was trying to be helpful. See, I'm so easy to get along with. And then I do things against my better judgment that people make mockery of 20 years later.
Certainly this cameo from Gillberg was a great gift, but another way that the listener could have gone was to get you a Gillberg oil painting, custom made for you.
That would have been wonderful because you got something to work with there. Because, see, here's the thing. A lot of people ask that painting of Don Callis and Twinkle Toes that was on Dynamite the last week, that they were in an obviously homoerotic pose and with their blue jeans unbuttoned and looked like they had just had Dave Draper and Lex Luger had just had a Mr. Universe illegitimate child. Dave Draper going way back for the superstar Billy Graham fans in the audience. You can't get that with Paint Your Life. Folks, you cannot, because Paint Your Life can only recreate things that have happened in life, and neither of those people have ever been in that type of premium physical condition. But if you want to get the perfect gift, it's too late for Christmas, but not for this coming Christmas, or for birthdays, or for Valentine's Day, or for anniversaries, or for weddings. This is the great gift to give your family, your close friends, your loved ones, a painting from Paint Your Life. We've talked about them on the program before. At paintyourlife.com, they've got a team of world-class artists standing by, waiting for you to communicate with them, and they can take any photograph or series of photographs and turn them into a hand-painted portrait. So you can not only have a painting of someone in your family that looks exactly like them, but you can combine pictures into one painting so you can have a grandfather and a grandson that weren't even alive at the same time, all in a family picture. You can recreate a place and put a loved one in it, whatever the case. Whether one photo or many photos, They can combine them. Your family, your kids, your special place, your cherished pet. It makes a great gift. And at paintyourlife.com, there's no risk. If you don't love the final painting, your money is refunded, guaranteed. And right now, as a limited time offer, you can get 20% off the painting, 20% off and free shipping if you text the word DRIVE, D-R-I-V-E, to 64,000. That's DRIVE to 64 with 3 zeros. We've had people talking about this before, asking exactly how many zeros are in 64,000. In the English language, that means there's 3. 64000. Text DRIVE to 64000. Paint your life, folks, and celebrate the moments that matter most. Terms apply. Available at paintyourlife.com/terms.
All right, Jim. Well, we have some more emails, some more questions that we're going to get in this week here on the show. This next one sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Charlie in Starkville, Mississippi.
All right.
All right, what? I'm reading a question.
Well, I'm not surprised.
What are your thoughts on NBC's Young Rock TV show? Do you think it will be a hit?
Well, I mean, I can see where the concept would be a hit, but since I've not seen a trailer or a clip or who knows what they're going to do with it. I mean, you know, you've heard or seen surefire concepts in the past that they've totally, you know, just dropped the ball on. And also sometimes things get over that you wouldn't dream would get over from the synopsis. So he had a wild, wacky childhood, and he's one of the biggest movie stars in the world. So I can see that working. I don't know how they're going to.
It is going to be a bit weird to see them portraying Rocky Johnson as a decent human being on the show.
Well, no, now, come on now. I mean, I don't know how they're going to find people, how they're going to portray the wrestling business, how they're going to find people that looked in any way like these people, how they're going to recreate the time. I mean, he's talking about his time in Nashville. I guarantee you they're going to find no place else that looks like the Nashville Sports Arena unless they go there in person. I don't know if Hollywood writers are going to be able to transfer what being around the wrestling business was like in the 80s, or if it could play on television if they did. And I assume Rock is going to have a significant amount of control, but I don't know that he's going to sit there and write every single script by himself. So, I mean, you know, I'm tickled to see what it's going to be, but I have no idea how it's going to look or how it's going to go or whether it's going to be I don't see the show doing anything to make mockery of wrestling or, you know, cast it in a bad light in that respect that it's just this bullshit thing. But at the same time, you know, how do you do it? I don't know how they're going to do it.
What do you think has been the best portrayal of the wrestling business on either film or on a television show?
It's so hard to do and to recreate. And, you know, Paradise Alley had the coolest wrestling, but it was still, it was, of course, that was during the Depression era. It was a period piece as well. And it wasn't really technically the professional wrestling business. It was just kind of a weird thing that was going on in that location at that time. I mean, you know.
What'd you think of Mickey and Maude? Did you ever see that?
Mickey and Maude.
The Dudley Moore movie had like Andre the Giant, Hardboiled Haggerty, Big John Studd.
Oh, you know
Jay
what?
Strongbow.
I don't think I did, actually. If I did, it was 40 years ago. I mean, you know, the Wrestler was great for wrestling fans because, you know, Vern Gagne just spent some money and had the movie made. So it was great for wrestling fans, but it's kind of a crummy movie. But then you have the movies that are kind of good movies are a crummy and misrepresentative example of wrestling. Remember, Henry Winkler was supposed to be in the biography of Gorgeous George, and then it just became a bleached blonde wrestler because they couldn't get the rights and the one and only. And like Henry Winkler could ever look like a pro wrestler.
Yeah. That was Roddy Piper's first movie.
Yeah. You know, they would get, that's the way some of the guys would get parts in movies back in those days is if somebody was doing a movie peripherally about wrestling or what they thought wrestling was. So some of the real guys would get in the movies, but the movies would bear almost no reflection to the real wrestling business.
Yeah, Gene LaBelle got a lot of those guys because he was doing stunt work. And he would get some of them work, like Mondo Guerrero and Roddy Piper. And it got them their SAG cards, which was a wonderful gift to have if you're an active wrestler.
Yeah, well, the same thing in the 40s and 50s. A lot of the guys working the LA territories would get in movies or TV shows when parts were called. Billy Varga was all over the place. And then we talked about Mighty Joe Young not long ago. All those guys, or at least most of them, were working in the late 40s in the Los Angeles area. Miniker and oh God, who was the whole list? Wee Willie Davis and Primo Carnera,
Mike Mazurki, of course.
Mike Mazurki, he was still wrestling at that point, but he'd already been in movies for a while because of that face. And Man Mountain Dean was big in Southern California, so that's the way the guys would get in. But sometimes you have to go back and watch those things like the Three Stooges shorts where they did a couple of wrestling shorts or whatever to get footage of these great famous wrestlers from that period, because there's so few wrestling films still in existence. Like that, The Night in the City with Richard Widmark is a 1950 movie, and Zbyszko was had to be 60 years old at that point, but it's an opportunity to see one of the greats from the pioneer era and what he looked like, because they did a serious wrestling scene. And that was the style of wrestling, stylized for the movie, but kind of that you would have seen in the 1920s. So you get to see that, even there was no contemporaneous stuff still left, but you could see him do that movie scene. But so many of the guys were just doing comedy stuff, with sound effects and be rolling around. In the background of W.C. Fields' movie, The Man on the Flying Trapeze, the whole movie is about him trying to get tickets and get off work to go see the big wrestling match between, what was their names? Hukalaka Mishabab and the Russian Giant or something or other. And then in the closing scene, he almost gets into the fucking match, and one of the guys gets airplane spun and thrown out of the tent and fucking knocks him over. So, it's a way to see some of those guys, but you don't actually get to see a lot of serious wrestling. I don't even mean serious. I mean real, actual. They didn't wrestle like that in their matches, even though they were still a work in those days. So you don't get to see them doing what they did in front of people, but you at least get to see them themselves.
Our next question is one that we've received from a lot of people on Twitter and via email. It's about this coming week, AEW will have, along with Bleacher Report, the first ever AEW Dynamite Awards.
What, are they stealing the Corny Awards idea we just had last week?
I guess so.
Already plagiarism.
I have a list of the categories and nominees. Can I read these to you and see who you pick to win the AEW Dynamite Awards?
Sure.
For Best Moment on the Mic, the nominees are MJF and his "We Deserve Better" speech, Cody Rhodes accepting the dog collar match, Jon Moxley accepting the Inner Circle's invitation to join, Brandy Rhodes confronting Jade Cargill.
There you go.
And Orange Cassidy debating Chris Jericho.
Seriously. The only one of those things that actually perked our ears up and sounded like anybody meant what they were saying was Brandy's promo on Jane Cargill. So I got to go with that one.
I concur. The nominees,
I knew you would.
The nominees for Biggest Surprise are Matt Hardy's debut, Jake the Snake Roberts confronting Cody, Brody Lee arrives as the Exalted One, Sting's AEW debut, and Miro revealed as Best Man.
I got a wild card for you. The biggest surprise of all was TNT renewing that program for longer periods of time after seeing what they were doing originally. That's the biggest surprise.
I don't think it's a surprise because it's cheap programming for them.
It's a surprise that anybody would walk up after seeing what they had done for the first couple of months, walk up to them and say, please do more of this for a longer period of time. That's the biggest surprise to me.
If you're a TV executive who knows that you have this show at a relatively inexpensive price and knows nothing about wrestling, you may see that and go, I guess this is just what the wrestling business is. How much does the show cost? Oh, that's nothing. Let's sign them up.
Well, I guess you're right. Okay, the most surprising moment, TV executives have lost their freaking minds.
The breakout star of the year for the male category, the nominees are Orange Cassidy,
what the
Darby Allin, Eddie Kingston, and from the Dark Order, John Silver.
Well, with all due respect to Eddie's promos, the only if there's a breakout star in that category, it's Darby Allin.
I agree. For breakout star of the year female, the nominees are...
Is none of the above on the list?
Hikaru Shida, Anna Jay, Ty Conti, Big Swole. Can't even say that without laughing.
Yeah.
Big Swole, and Penelope Ford.
And the award goes to Serena Deeb. What the fuck?
Well, would you give for breakout star of the year? I don't know. I mean,
okay. Well, no, okay.
Best comeback, maybe.
If we're going to give an award to a member of the AEW female wrestling roster, the only two that shouldn't be working at a topless car wash or teaching fucking grade school are Serena Deeb and Thunder Rosa. So just give them everything, because otherwise you're just awarding the amateur hour.
I would give it to Anna Jay in terms of actual breakout. Coming from nowhere, getting over your first appearance, getting a contract.
Cinderella story.
Out of nowhere. Anna Jay, I would pick her.
Yeah.
I don't think every one of these women need to be at a topless car wash or whatever you just
Some
said.
of them could teach grade school.
The candidates, the nominees for biggest beatdown.
Goddamn, there's 6 of those on every program. And then they should have an in-ring live beatdown award and a back in the locker room pre-tape beatdown award.
The nominees are The Inner Circle jumps Orange Cassidy, Dark Order attacks Nightmare Family, Nyla Rose puts Riho and Shida through tables, Brian Cage sneak attacks Jon Moxley, and the Nightmare Family and Inner Circle brawl.
Well, I don't even really remember any of those, but what about this? What about the best beatdown should be the one that caused the most damage? What about when the one girl threw the other girl on Britt Baker and broke her leg, tore her knee up? Or what? But they've had like half a dozen injuries that have happened right on television. Why don't they show those and go, okay, the person that was hurt the worst by one of these bumblefuck klutzes that can't stick their thumb in their ass with 3 tries, the award goes to, and then they wheel him out in a fucking gurney, hooked up to a machine, wrapped up like the Invisible Man sipping soup through a straw.
I don't know if that necessarily goes with the spirit of this award. I would pick the
Best beatdown?
Best beatdown. I would go with the Dark Order attacking the Nightmare Family. That was a classic all-out beatdown.
Oh, is that the one where the guy punched the shit out of the canvas of the ring?
No, that wasn't
a foot away from Dustin's head?
No, that was actually a completely separate one. This is the one where Brody won the title. I think this is the one where Brody Lee won the title and then destroyed Cody. And next thing you know, Dustin and QT are dragged out. They're beaten up. Anna Jay chokes out Brandy Rhodes. It was a complete destruction of the Nightmare Family. I would go with that.
How long were all those people off and out of action?
Until Cody was done filming that show.
Oh, but he was okay afterwards.
Yeah, no, he had dark hair. It did something to cause his hair.
It beat his hair dark.
The candidates, the nominees for High Flyer Award are Ray Phoenix, Mark Quinn, Nick Jackson, or Pac. And interesting to note,
or anybody else on the show.
Pac's name, 3 letters, in caps. I didn't realize that before.
Oh, yeah, they capitalize it. Yeah, they do. What makes them anything different than Top Flight and Hoverboard and Danny Limelight?
I can tell you right now, they
Joe
were
Buttfuck and the Buttfuck Twins and the Burrito Brothers and Naomi and everybody else that does flips and dives and splashes and flops and cartwheels and gymnastics and cheerleading routines and tic tackles and flip flops.
Well, the people you just named, excluding the Flying Burrito Brothers, a fine
And
band,
Naomi.
and Naomi, the people you just named weren't there until just recently. I think this covers a longer period of time. So you're looking at.
I just mentioned a few. They basically, you can't have a best flyer because that's all any of them do. But going amongst the one, Mark Quinn gets a lot of height on his cheerleading routines. He'd be a hit if he joined the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. Let's go with him.
The nominees for hardest moment to clean up after.
Wait a minute.
Even their awards they don't take seriously.
Well, besides that, I don't think they have been able to clean up some of the stains they've left. But now, some of these things might not be something that we should just talk about, out in public on the air, some of the things they've had to clean up after. Oh, they're just talking about stuff that's happened on the wrestling show, not behind the scenes shit they need to cover up or anything.
That's right. No snowstorms talked about here. But the hardest moment to clean up after, the nominees: Orange Cassidy drops orange juice on the inner circle, the parking lot brawl, the bunkhouse match, and finally, Big Swole dumps garbage on Dr. Britt Baker.
Oh, I don't know. I don't see how any of that stuff can compare to the weekly shit that Tony Khan takes in his own ring in terms of his booking. Because that not only is hard to clean up, but the smell lasts for so long. But let's go with Big Swole. Anything that's hard to clean up.
Okay.
Big Swole's got to have a part in it.
I will abstain from that category. The next category, the nominees for biggest what the fuck moment: Cody Rhodes, steel cage moonsault. Sammy Guevara, hit by a golf cart. Kenny Omega wins the AEW World Championship and walks out of AEW. A bloody Britt Baker versus Hikaru Shida. And finally, the Young Bucks frog splash off of the stadium railing.
Oh, good God. Was that one of the ones they hurt themselves on because they were doing stupid shit and they had no business doing?
One of them got hurt. I don't know if that was the spot, but
I don't know. They hurt themselves regularly. And they as well. They don't hurt themselves physically as bad as they hurt their standing in people's eyes every time they have a match or try to have one. But anyway, I would say Cody's moonsault, because that was legitimately impressive and a what the fuck moment.
When was that? I mean, there were fans.
Remember,
there.
he did the moonsault.
I know, but
that was about a year, a couple months ago.
So are these awards from the beginning of Dynamite till the end of 20?
It's your story. You're telling it. I'm just fucking commenting.
Okay.
But that's he only did it once. He said he wasn't going to do it anymore, and I don't blame him. But that was impressive. The other things you mentioned, Britt Baker, she got busted open accidentally. I don't know why that's what the fuck. It happens all the time. It's wrestling. Kenny Olivier winning a fucking title in a company that he's one of the executive vice presidents of, and the promoter is figuratively, not literally, look those words up, folks, blowing him every week. So that's not a what the fuck moment. Sammy Guevara got hit by that golf cart. I've taken better bumps. If you want to see somebody get run over by something, look at the Eddie Gillberg running over Lawler in the parking lot at Channel 5 in Memphis. That's somebody got run over. That was a what the fuck moment. Sammy Guevara took a bump off a golf cart doing 4 miles an hour. What was the other choices? Or have you lost it already?
It's the other choice was the Young Bucks frog splash off the stadium railing.
Well, just because they look like frogs don't mean that they jump as well. So I'm going with Cody's moonsault. That's final answer.
Okay, the candidates for the Laugh Out Loud Award.
God, segments 1 through 11 on every weekly program?
Chris Jericho and MJF's Le Dinner Debonair.
Well, I'm glad that at least they acknowledged that was supposed to be a joke.
Britt Baker waxes Tony Schiavone.
I'm glad that they told us there that the heel was just acting funny to entertain us and is in no way really a obnoxious bitch.
The Young Bucks kick MJF into a pool.
Well, because the fucking heel has to be made fun of every time he's starting to get a little bit of heat. It has to be taken off of him, or elsewise it'd look too much like a wrestling program.
And finally, the Inner Circle's Vegas trip.
Yeah, what part of that was funny?
None of it.
There you go.
It was funny how much money they wasted filming it.
But that wasn't really funny unless you were one of the people that they paid to be there for nothing. So I say none of the above on that one. Nothing they do. Everything is intended to make you laugh out loud. Nothing actually does.
The candidates for Best Twitter Follow are MJF, Orange Cassidy, Dr. Britt Baker, and Nyla Rose.
So they're not up for following for the most amount of followers. It's in other words, the best Twitter follow is which one of these people is best to follow on Twitter.
I would assume
is the phrasing of this. Well, I used to follow MJF. I can't remember whether I didn't block him. I don't know whether I unfollowed him after he became a song and dance man. I can't imagine any of the other people besides MJF having anything witty that I'd want to hear. So I would have to go there.
And finally, the Bleacher Report pay-per-view moment of the year. The nominees are Stadium Stampede, Jon Moxley wins AEW Championship, Hikaru Shida wins AEW Women's Championship, Omega and Page defeat the Young Bucks, Darby Allin wins TNT title from Cody, and finally, the Young Bucks win AEW Tag Team title.
Wow. Great moments. Actually, the greatest Bleacher Report moment was when they found out that Tony Khan was going to pay them a lot of money for them to write all these fucking suck-up puff pieces and complimentary fucking items for publicity on their website, right? That'd be the best Bleacher Report moment when they found out they were getting paid.
But it was Bleacher Report pay-per-view moment of the year.
Oh, okay. In that case, well, the football fuckery match almost got us to quit watching the entire professional wrestling industry. That was so embarrassing. And then you rattled off a bunch of other ones that I don't remember what any of them looked like because it was just all of the EVPs masturbating and filleting themselves endlessly in public. So I'll go with whichever one was listed on top just to make it easy.
And there it is. The categories and nominees for the AEW Dynamite Awards.
And I got an idea of what you could do with that dynamite. You could put it underneath all them awards and blow them all to kingdom come. As Aunt Lola would say, most of those television programs are not worth the powder that it would take you to blow your own nose.
Well, let's stay on the topic of AEW for our next question. Sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Grant McKenzie in Dundee, Scotland. I wanted to ask your opinion on Cody Rhodes having his own exclusive entranceway on the AEW stage. It reminds me of Kurt Angle's entrance in TNA, but more specifically, the Triple H WrestleMania entrance, which seems to get grander all the time. Kurt was a huge signing for TNA, so I get this. Triple H is part of the McMahon family, so I get that too, even if it is a bit hubristic. Cody, though...
That may be the first time the word hubristic, as in reeking of hubris, has ever been uttered on this program.
It certainly is. Cody, though, seems a bit over the top, and to me it gives a higher status to him than the rest of the roster. No matter who is world champion, Cody gets the fancy entrance and so is always being presented to the audience as special. I wonder how the other talent would feel about it. What do you think the reaction in the locker room is? And what impact does it have overall, if any? Thanks for the great shows.
I think the reaction of the rest of the locker room is, yeah, Cody's one of the EVPs, so he gets the entrance he wants. And I think they've got so many other problems on that program that this is one of the least of them. I think that maybe subliminally, for people who really pay close attention, it helps get Cody over. But as I said, there are so many other roadblocks on the rest of the program that I think it's kind of a non-issue. It's just he wants his own fucking entrance.
It is a ridiculous over-the-top entrance every week.
But also it doesn't make sense to me that he comes out and then this group of people walks out from the wings and is with him, and he should have Arn with him when he comes out. Arn's his manager. He and Arn should come out. Talent can be in front, manager can be in back, but they should be together. They should come from the same place, and that's all he needs at ringside. He's a babyface to begin with, so just having a manager at ringside is tough, especially when you want the numerical advantage over a heel. But to have his wife and his brother and his training partner and his CPA and the fellow that walks his dog every other Sunday to come out from the wing and then walk him out there, and then half of them leave and some of them stay, and I don't know what the fuck. He's going for the walkout crew, the corner crew, like at a UFC fight, but at the same time, I think you can agree with me on this. There has never been a mainstream professional wrestling promotion or a wrestling promotion that's on any kind of television with any kind of a budget or reaches any amount of people that has been less rooted in reality than AEW. That's fairly a safe statement, right?
You know, I don't want to say for sure because there's been some real suck-ass shows the last 15 years or so, but
I mean, on any kind of mainstream television basis, with any kind of names involved, any kind of budget, and on an ongoing basis, this is the least believable, less rooted in reality, less credible, more obviously showbiz promotion that's ever been. And so why Cody's doing all this, the trainer and the coach and the little he's doing, it'd be perfect what he was doing if he was in a pro wrestling program. But he's not. So he's bringing out a UFC corner crew consisting of, like I said, his brother and his best friend and his wife and his actual manager and whatever. And it just looks goofy because there's glimmers of ideas in everything they're doing, but they're all botched up.
The entrance presents Cody like the biggest star they have. The booking never does.
Yes, exactly. And in all honesty, Cody should have been pushed from day one as the biggest star they have on the babyface side, and Jericho, which he was pushed at day one as the biggest heel, because that's the way it was. And Cody, you could count on Cody to now, unfortunately, you can count on him to have a good match with the fucking parking attendant and the guy fucking putting the cheese sauce on the fucking sausage dogs at the concession stand, but Cody was the best worker. Cody was young enough to be in the generation. He'd had WWF TV exposure, but still he had the genes, he had the name, he had the head. He looks great. You would want to push him as a top babyface from the start. The entrance makes sense. You wanted to push Chris Jericho as the top heel from the start. But Cody's, besides the fact you mentioned, his booking has been, I don't know what the fuck, here and yon and just all over the place. He's kind of, I mean, he had the classic wrestling matches. He had the match with Dustin. He had a good match, as I recall, with Jericho, did he not? He had
that's probably Jericho's best match in AEW.
Cody's big matches were the best things they've still ever done. As far as pro wrestling, his match with Dustin was probably the best pro wrestling match that anybody's done I've seen in the last 2 years. It may be Walter and fucking Ilya, but that's modern pro wrestling. There's different styles. Anyway, the point is, for fuck's sake, it wasn't a stretch to think they would push Cody as the top babyface from the start, but why they didn't do it right and why they've botched it and it started and stopped, and he's had these competitive matches with Peter Avalon and fucking the weird things they've done, and Brandy I would assume would have turned anybody who doesn't like Cody 75% of it's got to be because he's aligned with Brandy, and she's been so completely insufferable on the entire run of that program. So most of the people that don't like Cody, I'm sure it's because of Brandy. They think, well, if we get rid of Cody, we won't have to look at Brandy anymore. So,
I don't think that's the reason.
Well,
I don't think that's the reason at
anyway,
all.
but I mean, she got a lot of heat on him being in his shit. If she's over somewhere else away from it, that's okay. But when she was with his shit, she was getting heat on him.
She was the opposite. I felt like when she was doing her own thing, people were saying it's only because of Cody. Remember the Nightmare Collective where she was cutting people's hairs and she had the bald woman with her?
Yeah, you misunderstood. Well, I'm not. I see what you're saying. If when she was on her own, they were saying, well, she's only there because of Cody. True. But when she was actually involved in Cody's shit, she was actively making people dislike what Cody was doing at that particular point in time. It was taking it down a notch. Anyway, the problem is apparently, and maybe he's doing a Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels thing. Bret Hart took a year off because he knew that Shawn Michaels would have a mental meltdown as the world champion and wouldn't be able to draw, wouldn't be able to handle it, wouldn't be able to conduct himself in the locker room, and would probably have a nervous breakdown or overdose on drugs, whatever the fuck. Wouldn't you know who won the pony? Bret Hart was gone for a year and Shawn Michaels couldn't fucking handle it. Had a mental meltdown, took a lot of fucking drugs, was an unprofessional prick, and didn't draw. So maybe when Cody first heard this fucking plot that they've actually told in public, where they were specifically not going to put the belts on Olivier and the Young Bucks for the first year because they didn't want to look greedy, but they were going to go for the second year, maybe he realized, okay, in the second year, these fucking morons are going to take all the belts and our company is going to go in the fucking hole. So maybe he's figuring, I'll just fucking back up and be over here and let Olivier be the fucking champion and let the Bucks be the tag team champions, let people get sick and fed up with them, and then I can come back in and save it. Maybe that's what his thought is. I don't know. But getting back to the entrance, yeah, it makes him look special because it should. It's one of the few things that makes anybody on that show look special. He should have been a lot more special because they've shot themselves in the foot because he's one of the only guys that could actually carry this fucking ball if they were doing a wrestling promotion. But they've diminished him from where he was to where he is now, like they have everybody else.
Well, Jim, when Cody comes out through his long, dramatic entranceway and the music's playing, everything's happening. Sometimes he's ready to wrestle. Sometimes he's in a suit. He likes to dress up.
You know what? He never looks comfortable.
No.
When he's in that suit. He looks like he's itching. He looks like he's constrained. He looks like it's scratchy. He doesn't look like he's relaxed. And that's what a stiff, scratchy, regular old run-of-the-mill men's dress shirt will do to you. They'll make you feel uptight. They'll make you pick at your neck and say, oh, what a crowd. They'll be scratchy, and they'll make you finger yourself underneath your fucking armpits and shit, trying to straighten it out.
There's got to be a better way to phrase that.
What?
They're going to finger themselves?
Yeah, stick a finger under your armpit and try to pull that scratchy fucking arm seam out from under your armpit when you're sweating in that suit. Well, none of that stuff happens with a shirt from Buttercloth. Folks, we've been talking about these people for quite a while. The people at Buttercloth have made the world's most comfortable t-shirt. If you want to wear a men's dress shirt that fits perfectly and feels great, but feels like you're wearing your favorite t-shirt, you got to go to the people at Buttercloth. Whether you're small and portly or tall and thin, or even if you're tall and portly, or just outright if you're a fat fucking slob, whatever you are, they have a range of sizes and fits. So, as they say, you'll look like Friday night, but feel like Sunday morning. Actually, I know a lot of people that didn't look very good on Sunday morning. They looked better on Friday night, regardless. Anyway, as we said, it's not stiff and scratchy. It's a revolutionary fabric made with long fiber cotton, a 6-way stretch. It's breathable to keep you warm in the wintertime, cool in the summertime. signature details, tailored fit. This thing was a hit on Shark Tank a couple of years ago. That Robert, that I can't pronounce his last name, invested $250,000 in these folks. And now look what's happened. Wouldn't you know who won the pony? They're a big deal. Robert who?
Herjavec.
Well, you do and you'll clean it up. I can get you some Pepto-Bismol, though. Anyway, folks, they got a great gifting program with a beautiful gift box because during COVID, nobody wants to go out to the mall. You can ship to multiple addresses in one order and put in personalized notes. It's one-stop shopping. You can send a world of comfort to yourself or every man in your life. Folks, right now, Buttercloth is offering our listeners 20% off your first purchase. Go to Butter. You know how to spell butter? B-U-T-T-E-R, cloth. That's even easier. C-L-O-T-H, buttercloth.com/JCE. 20% off your first full price order. Buttercloth.com/JCE. They can fit you no matter what you look like. If you've let yourself go, if Norman Frederick Charles, as he used to say, look at the state of you. If you're just all fucked up, they can still fit you, no matter what you look like. Buttercloth.
That's right. Very comfortable shirts. We highly endorse them here on the show, but let's get a few more questions.
Everybody looks better in a nice shirt.
That's right.
Some people I know should wear that nice shirt right over the top of their fucking pointy heads.
Okay. We'll get a few more questions here on the show before we wrap things up. This next one sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Ali Sabagi in Mashhad, Iran.
Well, now, wait a minute. So Ali from Meshuggah has written this question. What is it?
Hello, Jim. Hope you read this and answer my question. My question is, who is the better man between AJ Styles and CM Punk? Who had the bigger impact and who was the better wrestler? In my opinion, it's CM Punk. He was the most over guy WWE had in recent years. And even after he left, fans never gave up on him. He had so many great matches and great promos. What do you think? Thank you, bye.
No, fuck you in there, eh? Okay, well, read the first line, the first line of the question.
And again, let's understand there may be a little bit of a language barrier here.
Well, yes, I know, but I'm just saying let's get back to the meat of the matter, the way the question was phrased. Read the first line of the question. I will comment.
Who is the better man between AJ Styles and CM Punk?
And that's, second language, but who's the better wrestler? Or who's the better star? What? See, that's an open-ended question. What are you looking for? As far as technical wrestling, I think CM Punk would probably admit that AJ Styles is a phenomenal athlete. The springboards and the balance and the drop kicks and that flying phenomenal forearm and the dives and, his physical conditioning. Yeah, AJ would be ahead of Punk in that category, probably by a good bit. Having said that, everybody remembers Punk's pipe bomb promo, but CM Punk is quite a wordsmith. AJ Styles has never had the reputation as being a world-class orator. If you put AJ Styles on a fucking soapbox in the middle of the town square in merry old England, do you think he'd draw a bigger crowd than CM Punk? Verbally? Probably not. Are you talking about who achieved the higher level in the WWF? Because they've both worked there. AJ was used more consistently as a main event guy in TNA than Punk was really used for a longer period of time in WWF as a main event guy, but it was TNA. So Punk achieved more success being over on his own as a single in the WWE than AJ did. Does that make him a better wrestler? Or does that make him a better personality? Or does that just mean that they pushed him better and his booking was better? All of these things have to be taken into play. AJ Styles was never in a position where he could quit if he didn't get the main event at WrestleMania and be able to tell the son-in-law, I don't have to work with you, you need to work with me. Not that AJ would probably ever come up with that witty of a line to begin with anyway. So it just depends on what you're looking for. there's really no clear-cut answer. Punk had more success as a single wrestler when business was stronger in a spot on top in the WWE than AJ did. AJ was definitely a main event wrestler in some company for a longer uninterrupted period of time than Punk was. A lot of that time was spent in Impact, so that's got to factor in because that's like being the nicest guy in prison. You're a star in Monogram Studios. There's no comparison between really the athleticism of AJ and Punk. AJ gets that. There's no comparison really in verbal abilities. Punk gets that. And as far as who was the best professional wrestler as worker, as psychologically, I think Punk got more fucking mileage out of less because AJ, he had to have those long athletic matches, whereas Punk was able to work and draw money with in shorter WWE style pay-per-view matches against the top workers that wasn't going to be doing fucking dives and topes and have a coronas and things.
Does that make Punk the smarter worker?
Probably. But not really. Because AJ was smart enough to know, look, he's 5'7", and at his size, he had to do that stuff or he was never going to get the chance. So it's not, and also AJ is one of those guys that he never did shit that was reckless or dangerous, except maybe to himself. But he's got that weird ability to figure that shit in to where it doesn't look like just a bunch of fucking high school cheerleaders. So he had to do a lot more stuff at his size to get noticed and etc. So it may make Punk a smarter worker, but it's not like AJ was going to get the opportunity to work like Dick the Bruiser and be on top.
In terms of bigger overall star, would you say it's CM Punk?
Yeah. Just because he was on top when there was still, the WWF had twice as many viewers as they have today, and AJ was still in TNA where they had twice as many viewers and 5 times as many viewers as they have today, and still didn't have half of WWF's.
All right. Well, Jim.
This is math. I'm not knocking either guy when I say that. When you're the star of a television program that's being watched by 4 million people every week, you're a bigger star than a star of the television program that 1.5 million are watching. Isn't that kind of the way it goes?
I think so. Speaking of the way it goes, our next question, sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com.
That's just the way it goes.
From Matthew in Charleston,
Some things
South
will
Carolina.
never change. Is the Bruce Hornsby of Bruce Hornsby and the Range, is he related to or the same person as the Bruce Hornsby that gets credits in Always Sunny in Philadelphia?
It can't be.
Well, it's the only Bruce Hornsby I've ever heard of.
When I was, a quick little story. When I was working at Sony Music, my office on the executive floor was right opposite the executive conference room. It was on the other end of the hall. So you could, see who's coming and going, and I always knew what was happening. And they had a big thing in there when they signed Bruce Hornsby to, I believe, Columbia Records. And they had him there and his management and different people from the label. And they were playing his new album. That's what you do. You sit down and everyone copies the way that the top executive listens to music. And if he closes his eyes and bobs his head, that's what everyone starts to do. So they're in there listening to the Bruce Hornsby record. At this point in time, Sony Music, which would actually maybe right after the merger, which became Sony BMG for a time, was run by Andy Lack, who had come from CBS, and then NBC News.
Andy Lack, yes, he was one of the people that was blamed for the downfall of CBS News as a great institution and turned into a money-making fucking machine. Go ahead.
And that's how CBS is where he met Sir Howard Stringer, who ran Sony Corporation at that time, and he brought Andy Lack to replace Tommy Mottola, who, good or bad, was a music guy. Andy Lack.
And also fucked Mariah Carey when she looked good.
You could say that as well. Also fucked Hall & Oates out of their rights and royalties, so that's another story. But he was at least a music guy. He knew music. Andy Lack wasn't. So they're in the conference room listening to the new Bruce Hornsby album that they just gave him a contract on the strength of this album. And Andy Lack storms into the room and opens the door and says, "Can you lower this? This is an office." And walks out, and all those record executives are like, what just happened? This is a record company. It's not just business, it's the music business. And that's my Bruce Hornsby story right there.
Well, and as a matter, now we're seeing the same thing happen 25 years later in the wrestling business. What the fuck is that wrestling doing? Get that wrestling out of here.
Well, here's our next question, which I tried to go to before. From Matthew in Charleston, South Carolina. Jim, please talk about any memories or stories you have of the old lady olive oil at the township in Columbia, South Carolina.
Oh my God. I wish I had long stories about this because the guy asked a question and bothered to remember her, but I don't have any specific stories otherwise than there was always one, sometimes several regular fans, longtime fans at all the towns that the fans got a kick out of watching, and the boys knew, if it was a dead match, if you could yell at that person or fuck with that person, they were going to get up and they were going to get everybody else into it or whatever. And there was this one woman, I mean, all the jokes apply. She used a Cheerio for a hula hoop. She gets sunburned. She looks like a thermometer. Turns sideways, stick her tongue out. She looks like a zipper. She was skinny. She looked like olive oil. And the big floppy clown shoes and and the whole 9 yards and skinny neck. And she was one of those ones at the Columbia Township Auditorium that you could, that was always like bouncing Beulah in Knoxville, Beulah Boshier. Or like, everybody in those days, wrestling in the 50s and 60s had the ringside Rosie. And which I think was the generic name for a while for any old lady that was really active at the wrestling matches. But didn't Dennis James, the game show announcer, when he was doing wrestling back in the early 50s, I think he named one of the old ladies in Chicago Ringside Rosie or whatever, and the nickname stuck. But every town had somebody that was, the recognized fan that would go too far. In Louisville, we had Grandpa, and he didn't go too far, but we also had, this woman didn't have a nickname, but me and a few people at ringside used to call her Fish Meat Face because she looked like her face was literally put together from dead filleted fish meat. She was probably 4'7". She couldn't weigh more than 75 pounds. She had glasses the glass was so thick, she looked like a seal peeping through a block of ice. And she must have been in her, I don't know how old she was. She didn't look like a human being should be allowed to live this old, but she had to be legitimately in her 60s. And the old shriveled up and a gray hair flying everywhere. And her husband was 6'3" and 250 pounds and never shaved, had never seen a razor, but never had a long beard, just had the growth, right? To look like he had just come out from under a fucking car at a gas station. And he was just the low-keyedest guy and just friendly and talk to you, but she would never speak. She'd just sit there and eat popcorn or look at the program or do whatever until the matches started. And then she would stand up and out of her mouth would come. You remember when Vince McMahon introduced the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin?
WrestleMania 3, yeah.
Okay, he sounded like Wayne Newton as a teenager there compared to this woman's voice. She was so deep and gargling so many razor blades and screamed at such a volume that you couldn't understand any word that came out of her mouth except the cuss words, which was motherfucker, cocksucker, you piece of shit. And it was like she was turning into Linda Blair and vomiting pea soup right in fucking front of you. And then when the match was over, she'd sit right next to her poor old husband and wait for the next one to come. And we used to call her Fish Meat Face. And her, I can't remember what her husband's name was, but he was a guy, when you asked him, how you doing? He'd tell you. He would go over every single, and he was never going to live more than 6 months from that point. He was there every week at the matches, never missed a match for 7 or 8 years that I was going before I got in the business, but he was always 6 months away from death. So one time, I'm trying to think, I did it actually a couple times. This one specific time I'm thinking about, who come down? Somebody Terry Justice had come down here one time to see the Gilberts, or it may have been Brian Hildebrand when he came down to visit one time, but whatever it was, a friend of mine from out of town was in to see the matches, and the bell's about to ring, and I'm about to go up to ringside to take my position to do the photography, and I see old Fish Meat Face's husband, and I introduced, whether it was Brian or Scott, whoever it was, Terry Justice, whoever, I introduced him to Fish Meat Face's husband, and I said, say, I was just telling so-and-so you've had some medical problems lately. How you feeling? And then I took off and went to the back, right? And 10, 15 minutes later, I come out there about ready to ring the bell. I'm going up to ringside. He's still telling him. He couldn't get away from him. Sort of like this story I'm telling you now. So anyway, there was always one of those type of fans.
All right. Well, our next question sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Daniel Duran in San Antonio, Texas. I wanted to ask about any incidents having to deal with locker room thieves. Roddy Piper mentioned in his book that Gorilla Monsoon had once set a trap to catch a thief when the wrestlers were noticing that their money was missing. Also, there was an incident where Rick Rude knocked out PN News, stemming from the rumor PN News was suspected of being the thief at that particular locker room. Have you heard of these two incidents? Is there any truth to them? If so, do you have any details? And also, do you have any other stories about locker room thieves?
Well, I remember hearing something about the Rick Rude and PN News thing was what, mid-90s WC or early 90s WCW, and I was not there. I don't know the details. Yeah. I also remember vaguely Piper telling a story of Gorilla setting a trap, but I can't remember what that story was. But the overall subject of the question, which is who's stealing shit in the locker room, or were they, or what stories about it? Back then, the locker rooms in those days, I mean, now not only you go to a big event like a WWF event, and the locker room's supposed to be sacred, but the locker room's sacred except for every goddamn technical person that needs to come in and out because they're shooting shit, or everybody on the writing team, which now numbers 20 or 30 or 40, or production. When I was there at the Hall of Fame thing, Vince now has 2 assistants that come to the matches and are just there to do stooge work for him. That's the only thing they do. I mean, we used to all do the stooge work for him because he didn't have a specific stooge, but there was actually a guy there that was waiting with 3 or 4 suits for Vince so he could pick which one he wanted to wear, and he was just sitting out there for an hour holding those suits, waiting for Vince to come out of his office. So, point is, in the old days, the only people that were ever in the locker room were guys on the card. And the exception to that rule was if the if the state athletic commissioner, whatever state, was there, the commissioner got to go in the locker room. But there's a state employee, right? In my experience, in a lot of these towns, most of the towns, even the police, the uniformed city police officers that were working security, never came in the locker room. They picked you up right at the entranceway of the dressing room as you were coming out, and they walked you to the ring, and whatever, they walked you to the car. They weren't allowed in the locker room. I, as photographer, I was the photographer in Louisville and Memphis and Evansville for 6 years. And I never actually was allowed into the locker room in Louisville until my first day as a manager. It was downstairs. I didn't need to go down there. I took all my pictures upstairs. You were on a need-to-go basis in the locker room. I'd been close in Evansville sometimes because I'd go down to record radio spots down to a certain place that we could get quiet, but was still not in the locker room. So it was only the boys. It wasn't like it is. You go to independent shows, everybody's there, every friend, every employee of the building. I saw the Louisville Gardens building manager in a 7 or 8 year period go down to the locker room area one time because there was a busted fucking shower pipe. Otherwise, the wrestling promoters, usually, most every place I had experience with, made it clear to the arena, we're renting this building, we're paying for the staffing, so we will decide where they can or cannot go. So have I made it clear that nobody besides the boys, the managers, the referees, and the people involved in the promotion, with very few exceptions and only for limited amounts of time, were allowed in wrestling locker rooms? So when something starts turning up missing, it's got to be one of the boys. And certain guys had developed reputations. I remember hearing about a guy named Bill White, was an old-time wrestler. And I've seen him wrestle when I was a fan. I was never in a locker room with him, but they called him Bill Watch Your Poke White. Does anybody know what a poke is anymore these days?
Probably not.
Okay, it's your fanny pack, it's your wallet, your poke, what you got your shit in, carrying your poke around. Well, they called him Bill Watch Your Poke White because when he would be in a territory, things would fucking happen and people had made accusations or whatever. You were leaving your wallet in your bag, or you know, and a lot of time, obviously it'd be fucking goofy if you open your wallet and all the money is gone. But locker room thieves, if they could catch, and there were very few of them, but it happened, but if they could catch the locker room empty where a lot of the guys are watching a match at the curtain upstairs, or you just whatever, and they had the opportunity, if they knew a guy had a lot of cash on him, if your wallet had $400 when you went to the ring and you came back, it might have $200. And a lot of guys used to count their money after they came back from the ring. And I always wondered why. I'd ask Dennis Condrey. And he told me that. You wouldn't notice at first, and then you'd be somewhere else, and you go, well, what? I thought I had more money. Or if there was whatever the choice was at the time. Was there weed in the bag? Was there pills in the bag? Was there fucking whatever there was in the bag? Sometimes you would see, kind of, sort of get a feeling somebody was doing something, and you would ask somebody if they would watch you while you opened somebody's bag. If you felt like something was in there that people would recognize as it shouldn't be, it was yours or it was somebody else's, it shouldn't be in this guy's bag. And there's been debates on this, but poor Sean Stasiak, when he was in the locker room in the 90s in the WWF, he had a tape recorder running in his bag that he left running. I think he was accused of leaving it running to see if people were going to talk about him behind his back after he left the room, because he was a person who was somewhat high-strung about things like that. But they thought he was fucking taping them for fucking to stooge on somebody or whatever. But anyway, so you would come up with various ways. If you couldn't prove that somebody in the locker room was taking shit or poking around in people's bags or whatever, the easiest way, I also learned this from Dennis Condrey, you know what the easiest way is to make sure that your shit is taken care of if you suspect one of the members of the roster is a thief?
I don't padlock or stick a gun in their face? I don't know.
No! Since all the territories only kept like fucking 20 guys on the roster, you're in the locker room with 10 or 12 heels, or you're in the locker room with 10 or 12 baby faces, and you suspect one of those people is a thief, every single person in the locker room would go to that person before their match and say, hey, here's my wallet. Can you keep an eye on it for me? Well, now they're fucked. What are they going to... I know you have my shit now, motherfucker, and I know what I just gave you. So when I come back from the ring, you're going to hand it back to me.
Pretty smart.
That's the foolproof way to fucking take care of a thief without, if you can't prove it. If it got proved, everybody's, anybody that got proved they stole something either got fired or beat up or both. But a lot of times you couldn't prove it, so you would just make it more difficult and kind of send them a message. And so I've had Flair's fucking Rolex in my pocket. I've had fucking fanny packs for guys because, when you would go to different territories sometimes, or maybe have, be in a new environment, you'd go to somebody that you knew and say, hey, here's my shit. Keep an eye on it, whatever the fuck. And the first time we worked Kansas City, me and the Midnight Express were booked there from Dallas, world class, in 1985. And fuck, it was Kansas City and St. Louis. We thought of St. Louis Kiel Auditorium. This is going to be a big deal, but it was 3 years after Sam Muchnick's retirement, and they had there was 1,200 people there. And Kansas City was half of that. It was the shits. And we walked in the locker room, and we looked at guys that had duct tape holding their toe of their boots together where they'd flapped out, and they had to tape it up. And it was the dying days of a fucking territory that wasn't major in its day. And we took all our shit. We never had a problem with our shit. With especially working in major territories, there wasn't any thieves on a regular basis in Crockett or in, WCW or whatever. But we took all our shit back out to the rental car and locked it in the fucking glove compartment because we just saw this, the guys are in such need here. It was a downer. It was sad, but nobody was making any money there at that time. We're like, fuck, we'll see. And as a matter of fact, that's one of the nights Flair was there in St. Louis. That's one of the nights I held his watch because he's going to leave a fucking $15,000 Rolex laying around where guys are making $250 a week, so. But it didn't happen a lot. But most of the major thefts that you hear about, I'll close with this, from locker rooms or from wrestling events were when nobody was in the locker room. For whatever reason, they didn't have a guard on the door, or somebody turned their back and somebody went in and made off with a belt or a robe or something that they wanted as a souvenir that, was recognizable. Flair lost robes. Guys have lost belts, jackets, different things. And, not money, but things that a fan or an outsider would take if they got the opportunity. And that's been the biggest thefts, that I remember out of wrestling events, except by the promoters at the box office. And anytime Captain Ed George was watching the Kobo box office for the Sheik, they had a lot of robberies then.
What about Dick Steinborn?
I've heard that, and I hate it because Dick Steinborn, I met him in 77. I just started as the photographer in Louisville like less than a year before, and he came through, and he was quite a good photographer and also had been in the wrestling business 25 years, was a really good worker, and his father, Milo Steinborn, one of the most famous, strong men, is, written up in a lot of books, and he was very nice, gave me a lot of advice on photography, more advanced than I was at the time, with bounce flashes and slave units and stuff, just pointing this and that out. And was just a really nice guy and wasn't here long, but never had anything but good to say about our interaction. And then I've heard stories years gone by that he was light-fingered Louie. And I'm, I don't know.
All right. Well, our next question, and if it's not our last one, our second to last one, but we'll see how this goes.
Should I tank this or go on? Which one are you looking for?
Well, this was sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Donnie in Tamaqua.
Tamaqua, Oklahoma?
Doesn't specify. Okay, here's the question.
No, that's Tahlequah. There's a Tahlequah, Oklahoma. There must be a Tamaqua, New Jersey.
In 1996, when the Ultimate Warrior was fired in the summer and Sid was brought in to fill the vacant spot.
Oh, good God.
How far was that spot for the Ultimate Warrior booked out? In other words, when it was Sid versus Shawn Michaels for the WWF title at Survivor Series 96, was that originally slated months in advance for the Ultimate Warrior to face Shawn Michaels for the title?
Maybe in Vince's head, but it wasn't put on paper that far. I'm just looking back to that time. The Survivor Series 96 was November 17, 1996 in New York City. And who did he say? Well, Sid,
it was Sid versus Shawn. Yeah.
It was Sid with Shawn. No, the Warrior was gone by, I'm backing up here, summertime. He just said, was it June or July? Or did it even last that long? I'm trying to find out when he had his meltdown.
But if he hadn't had, I guess that's part of the question. If he hadn't had that meltdown, was he going to win the title? Was he going to be in the main event against a Shawn Michaels or someone else at Survivor Series? What were the plans for Ultimate Warrior when he left?
no, Shawn Michaels was never going to fuck it. If Shawn Michaels wouldn't do a job for anybody, can you imagine booking Shawn Michaels and the Ultimate Warrior? For fuck's sake. I don't think Vince would have been that crazy if it had come up. Warrior wouldn't have sold anything. He would have considered Michaels too small. He would have wanted, if he beat Helmsley like that, can you imagine what he would have wanted to do to Michaels? Also, Michaels was way fucking smarter politically and capable, because Warrior was out in the woods and mentally, and capable of coming up with many more excuses to not have a match or to not lose a title. He could lose his smile, but he couldn't lose the belt. So that would have been a disaster to even put on paper. And I don't know what they would have done with the Warrior. I guarantee you that we never discussed putting the WWF Championship on the Warrior when he made his return, because I was on the creative team. The idea of pushing him to the title was never discussed. He was going to be there. He was going to be an attraction. You know, he was going to be used on top. He was in all those fucking, the group match that he was in with, who was it? Him and Ahmed Johnson, Warrior, Ahmed Johnson, and who else at the time were kind of the upper level baby faces, but not guys that were going to be in the title picture, right? I'm just looking at some of these fucking cards, and there wasn't time to fucking do any major planning with him. I'm still trying to find, Ultimate Warrior pinned Isaac Yankem DDS with the flying shoulder block and splash. That was Glenn Jacobs' last TV appearance for 5 months. That was in April. When did Sid come in and replace Warrior? Because when did Warrior have the meltdown about the fucking toy fair and his logo and everything?
I don't remember the exact date. I would have guessed July.
Because then we had to, I'm kind of thinking the same thing. That's why I'm looking here, because then we also did that angle. It was up at the Hartford Civic Center in the parking garage where Sid was revealed, and we did some kind of chase scene and got some heat on the heels. That's when Owen and Bulldog fucking shaving creamed my goddamn Ford Taurus. I had to drive all the way home with a car covered in shaving cream. But anyway, the international incident in your house July pay-per-view, he's nowhere around, so he's gone by then. Psycho Sid sub for the Ultimate Warrior. Yeah, they just brought Sid in to substitute for him, and basically on that Vancouver pay-per-view as Vader, Owen Hart, and Davey Boy with me against Michaels, Ahmed, and Sid. Because remember, Michaels was still a babyface at that point. So, no, there was, and I guarantee you that Warrior definitely would have never been matched against Shawn Michaels in a babyface match if Vince had anything to do with it. So it evolved without him. That was not there was no idea that Shawn Michaels was going to face Sid or the Ultimate Warrior at the Survivor Series that year, because he was still a babyface and they didn't know what the fuck all he was going to do yet. He had lost his smile. He didn't lose his smile till the next year, but Brett was gone and Shawn was trying to be the boyhood fucking hero guy, and it was just blah. So no, that wasn't Warrior's spot, and there was no talk that I was ever around about making him the champion at that point in time on that run.
When he melted down, do you remember the conversation of, let's call Sid?
That was a conversation that Vince McMahon had with the voices in his head, because when I heard that Sid was coming back, the phone call had already been made. And I'm like, and I was highly against it because he had just fucking, 2 or 3 years previously stabbed and tried to kill Arn Anderson in England in that whole deal. And I'm like, fuck, Sid was a nicer person to just sit and talk to. If you weren't in the wrestling business, you just wanted to sit in a room and talk to somebody You get a lot more out of Sid than you would out of the Ultimate Warrior. But as far as the wrestling business, here we're trading a muscle-bound idiot who can't do anything for a muscle-bound kind of semi-idiot who can do a few things. And is also a former attempted murderer. That's why I named him Psycho Sid, because I told Vince, I said, you realize he's psycho? That's a great name, pal. We can do a play. SS, Psycho Sid. I said, there's a P in psycho. We'll do it SY. There you go.
You brought up Owen Hart real quick as we wrap things up. I had recently heard this. It's been around for a while, but I hadn't listened to it. Have you heard this prank phone call that Owen and Davey Boy made to a hotel guest for pizza?
Oh God, yes. I've heard that recording. I heard him one time from the actual end that he was doing it on. I've heard some of Owen's phone ribs from a few different directions, but yeah, that's a great one. I can't remember what the circumstances was that they recorded it, but
were there lots of recordings of Owen's crank phone calls?
No, that's what I'm saying. He wouldn't even plan it a lot of times. He just might be bored one night and he'd seen somebody come in the lobby and he'd go, oh, here we go, or whatever. So, but that's why I say I can't remember the circumstances behind how this one actually got recorded and lives on. But no, he'd have people, but he would either just drive the desk clerk to the brink of insanity, or he would pretend to be the desk clerk and call one of the boys and drive them to the brink of insanity, or whether pushing the pizzas on them, or I stole this one, did it to my ex-father-in-law, and thankfully he had a good sense of humor. Owen would have guests in the hotel out in the hallways or on the breezeway in those old-time outside fucking hotel type of deals, looking for a reported peeping Tom, trying to be a good citizen. Sir, if you could just look around your corner there, next to the Coke machine, see if there's anyone standing around or whatever. And they'd be, because when I did it I stole it from Owen, but when I did it to my ex-in-law there, he's yelling back to his wife, my mother-in-law, I don't see anybody. And I'd be telling her, can he just go around the next corner? Can you go around the next corner? And you'd be walking out, and 3 o'clock in the morning, you'd be walking around looking for fucking peeping Toms. Owen could do anything. But the pizza thing, it's hilarious because when you're listening to it, you can tell it's his voice because you know what you're listening to. But 2 o'clock in the morning, you get a phone call from some fucking Hindu at the front desk, and you're not thinking, and you go along with it, right? He could drive the boys insane.
You can kind of tell it's his voice. When Davey Boy jumps on and changes his voice, that's where it gets funny. When you called your in-laws, did you change your voice?
Yes.
What'd you do?
Excuse me, sir. I know that it is late at night, but we have had a report of a peeping Tom in the area of your room, and you would be able to see him if you just open the curtains or possibly open the door and just look to your left. We want to make sure the police are on the way. You'll be in no danger.
Not bad. There
you go.
You're not necessarily known for your voices, but that was pretty good. Well, with that, we wrap up another episode of the Drive Thru.
Boom goes the dynamite. If Darius Rucker does happen to be listening, I do apologize. He'll never speak to me again, I'm afraid. But Nash, I'd work on my bridges there. Oh, but good lyricism. But
Nash.
Wasn't that who it was?
Nate Bash?
Nate Bash. I thought it was Bait Nash. Nate Bash. That's who it was. Take off on the old Hootie and the Blowfish. Darius Rucker is a huge wrestling fan and friend of Ric Flair's, and grew up in Columbia, South Carolina, went to USC down there, and used to go to the township at Columbia Township Auditorium. Darius Rucker is one of the handful of human beings in the world that got a complimentary set of the Lost Mid-Atlantic Classic DVDs from me. So I don't know that he's a regular listener of my program. I would doubt it. But don't call your attorney, Darius. We just played that just for grins and giggles.
That's right, Hootie.
Woo.
But with that,
You know what? We could have had Hootie and the Blowfish playing at the goddamn the Great American Bash 86 in Philadelphia. They did the big stadium show. Hootie and the Blowfish was hotter than a $2 pistol on the radio right at that point. I think that's...
No, they
what?
weren't.
Huh?
No, in 1986?
I believe they were.
I believe you're thinking of maybe 1994?
Oh, no. You know what? It was the Hooters.
That's right. They were in Philadelphia. They were
It's
Philadelphia.
who we were all saying we could have had in Philadelphia in 86. But they could have had Hootie and the Blowfish in the 90s on WCW because he was a big wrestling fan and they were all idiots and they didn't do it. It was the Hooters in 86. Anyway, a lot of Hooters and Hooties.
Well, with that, the drive-thru is closed. All right.
Well, there you go.
Let's go a little old school.
God damn, it sounds like you fucking taking a stick to somebody.
Of course, you can hear the Jim Cornette Experience when it debuts on Friday, wherever you find your favorite podcasts and programming update. Remember, due to the Royal Rumble, the drive-thru debuts next Tuesday. Wherever you find your favorite podcasts, you can access classic episodes of the Experience in the drive-thru by becoming a patron. Patreon.com/Cornette. For only $5 a month, you get access to the archives from the beginning in 2013. Right now, we are uploading episodes from the spring of 2016, another batch of episodes each and every Sunday evening. Patreon.com/Cornette. You can access clips, full episodes, and omnibus collections of the Experience in the Drive-Thru on the official Jim Cornette YouTube channel, tinyurl.com/official corny YouTube, or just go to YouTube and search for Jim Cornette. It will be the very first thing that pops up, the official Jim Cornette YouTube channel with the exclusive and amazing Travis Heckel artwork. You can follow Jim on Twitter at @TheJimCornette. You can follow me on Twitter at GreatBrianLast. You can hear me on the 605 Superpodcast at 605pod.com, available wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Cornette's Collectibles will be back soon.
Closed.
We'll be back soon. Check again at another time. Don't forget that the drive-thru is brought to you by the Law Office of Stephen P. New, 888-692-8084. Get even with Stephen at newlawoffice.com. But until Friday on The Experience and Tuesday, right back here on the drive-thru, for Jim Cornette, I'm the Great Brian Last. Tally-ho!
Oh!